Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
This is a Majority Report news special breaking story. It turns out there's a primary in 6 states tonight. That's breaking out. Polls will be closing in just moments from now. And there we have it. So we'll be doing live coverage tonight. Joining me in studio, Nomiki Konst will be here from the Nomiki Show.
Oh, I am here.
You are here.
Breaking news.
Breaking news.
I will be here. I am here.
You got to roll that microphone up just a little bit closer to you.
It's a limping microphone.
No, there you go.
There, okay.
There you go.
Am I in shot? I was eating a pizza. I'm
No,
getting
that's
yelled
all
at for
right.
eating pizza on camera, but I can't.
Who's yelling at you for eating?
Twitter.
Oh, well,
When they zoom in on your face when you're mid-bite.
Twitter doesn't. Nobody's
create a
zooming.
meme out of it.
Nobody's zooming. Also joining us from Future Now, right?
Yeah.
Aaron Kleinman is here. What is your title there?
I'm the director of research.
Director of Research and Bobby Big Wheel on Twitter.
That's how some people know me, yeah.
There you go. I have trouble with that for whatever reason. It takes me a long time
Did you
to
tell him
figure
what
that.
you thought?
In retrospect, I should
What
have
did I
chosen
think
that.
it was? I don't know.
Sam
if
was like, what is it, Big Fat Daddy?
You know,
That's his night name.
There you go.
I mean, I will say, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't chosen a Deadspin commenter name in 2006 that abbreviated to BBW.
Okay. All right. Well, fair enough. We will be doing coverage, and of course, we've got the beefy crew today, right? Everybody's here. Jamie's here. Matt's here. Brendan's here. Even Dorsey is here. Michael is going to join us tomorrow to do a wrap-up of this evening. The stakes are pretty high. There's 352 delegates at stake, but it's a lot more than that, right? I mean, it's not just a question of the stakes, the actual delegates that we have tonight, but it really is. I think we still have the debate. And I think regardless of what happens tonight, it's hard for me to imagine that Sanders would drop out of the race. What is your sense of that, Nomi?
I think if he stays within a delegate, if he wins, obviously stay in the debate. If the delegates are close, clearly stay in the debate. If he's completely wiped out, I would reassess everything in the morning because the media narrative, things have been moving so fast. In 24 hours, things have changed. The narrative has changed. I mean, the last 4 days, are you okay? Do you need a water? You okay?
Everyone stay 6 feet away from me, please.
Can you see how concerned I was just now? The media narrative is not on his side. I think it'll be pressuring him even more so to get out of the race. Now, even more so because the debate could give him the momentum and the bounce back and possibly even the path to a quick turnaround.
Is there, Aaron, is there any number by which Sanders, if he did not win the majority of delegates tonight, is there any number that he could lose by that is greater than 1, where there would not be a chorus of calls for him to drop out?
I mean, I think there are going to be a chorus of calls for him to drop out regardless. But also,
that was my point.
I mean, he could end up winning Michigan, and I'm pretty sure there'd be some people saying, "Oh, we got to close ranks around Biden, got to take on Trump." I mean, I think that's just inevitable. I think he would get the loudest calls if he fails to carry a single state.
Right.
And, in terms of delegate math, that actually really doesn't matter that much whether you win a state by two points or lose it by 2 points. But if he can't win Washington, a state where really the demographics line up in his favor, a state that, it's one of those things where if he can't win Washington, where else can he win? Mm-hmm. That's really the implication there, even if the delegate math, it doesn't put him so far behind. But again, I think as Nomiki said, You have a debate coming up. I don't think there's any way he drops out before that debate, because I think that's his one real big chance to try to turn this narrative around. And what we've seen really over the past few weeks is, Biden isn't riding the strength of
Himself.
of himself
Of
or
his
a
mind.
campaign or of a campaign that he put together. He's riding the strength of earned media. He's riding the strength of a narrative that has developed around him, a narrative of kind of almost inevitability. And the debate next week is Bernie's real chance to just kind of pierce that aura of inevitability and get himself back in this thing. So,
people have. That's like in any other context. Let's just say. Let's just do the scenario. The sort of like the most extreme scenario. He loses every state. The margin becomes a little bit less relevant, but he loses every state handily. Let's just say. Even with that reality, there's never, it seems to me, it is not irrational to say he could go into that debate. Because this is the whole premise, right?
Come on, Sam. I'm sorry. I gotta say, he's not gonna do that. He's praising Joe Biden. You are going into Trump. This is not 2016. I hate all the Bernie people are gonna go after me right now. This is not 2016. We have to defeat Trump. And if that means Joe Biden finds some young vice presidential candidate and we have the power to push him, maybe, to put that vice presidential candidate in, come on, we don't want to keep false hope alive.
Well, I'm not. It's not about false hope, but it seems to me that like we watched what happened in Bloomberg in one debate in literally half an hour.
Sure.
And his entire campaign cratered.
I get that logically.
The concern, the genuine concern I have about Joe Biden is that he can't do a debate.
Absolutely.
And
they're concerned too.
On some level, you want to know that in March as opposed to late September, right?
Yeah.
And presumably he's going to be, if he can't do it in March, September, like, going to be worse. And the fact that they're doing the debate with no audience, essentially, it seems to me now, maybe Biden, maybe Trump doesn't do it, but that would be strange because that would cut against his narrative, assuming he's running against Biden. So the debate's going to happen. There's no way to avoid those debates in the fall, it seems to me, if you're Joe Biden. And so it seems to me to be really important to know if he can do. Because I have some serious questions about that. And I don't know that I've ever had that about any nominee ever. Like I've said, like, oh, some might do better, some might do worse. Like there is a greater chance than zero that over the course of a 2-hour debate where he has to speak half the time,
right,
that, who knows?
That's their fear. And that's why the pressure is going to be even higher than you can ever have imagined for Bernie if he doesn't take one state to get out of the race. And trust me, I think that's in Bernie's head too, because he remembers what happened in 2016. If he's not, if the entire Hail Mary is dependent on him performing well at a debate and Biden not performing well, the next, what day is the debate? The 15th?
Yeah.
The next 5 days are going to be hell on earth. If you thought the last 5 days were tough, the next 5 days, if he doesn't win a state, we're just saying this is only if he doesn't win a state, guys. We're just breaking out the scenarios. I think he's going to say, I'm not doing it. I really think so. I think there's too much on the line. He has signaled that he is not going after Joe Biden. And furthermore, I think that the establishment that's propping up Joe Biden clearly knows that he's not going to perform well.
Right.
And they're going to preemptively announce a vice presidential pick that's young and peppy and smart.
Well, look,
interesting.
We're tough too. Bernie's tough too. So don't you think that we can withstand 5 days of people being mean to us on the news?
I think this is a different moment.
I would actually,
let's hear Aaron's.
I would say, and you're more plugged into the Sanders campaign than I am, but
What does that mean at this point?
But the way I see it is, if Bernie doesn't carry a single state, the one thing that he really has going for him is leverage. And he's like, listen, I can end this thing now. I can sit this out. I can let you coast until November, but he's got to ask for something in return. And I think that for a lot of people on the left, I think the moment you want to compare this to is really kind of 2008, where you had Obama going in Obama kind of ran more from the liberal left, but he ran as kind of like a blank slate ideologically, in the same way that Biden is. Like Biden, he's kind of hard to grasp what his real ideology is because he's so slippery on a lot of that stuff. And so I think Bernie's kind of sit down with him, make sure that like his chief of staff isn't a Rahm Emanuel type. He's not nominating bankers to the cabinet. That float this week was a disaster. I mean, Bernie, if he can still ask for concessions, and he doesn't, by just kind of dropping out after, in a worst case scenario, doesn't want to stay dropping, like he doesn't get anything like that. If he stays in and he can kind of have the leverage of there's a debate coming up on the 15th, what do you want to do? And also, I mean, I think even within the, more moderate wings of the party, they still want to see Biden do well in a debate just to like show that he can do it.
I think there's a weird thing that okay, so in 2016 the big compromise was the Unity Reform Commission when Bernie gave up his delegates to Hillary Clinton, a process that carried out for 2 years and had to go through another process and another committee and was watered down in the end. And honestly, that commission gave so many other presidential candidates a chance in this cycle. With that being said, I don't think that they're going to give him anything. I think this is an establishment that is, remember in 2016 when Hillary Clinton I was on the platform committee, like they laughed at us. They did not give us any concessions. This is an establishment that is not going to give you an inch. They're not going to give you any room to breathe, and especially not Bernie Sanders, who they are very angry at right now. So there's a perception of leverage, and he could be really smart about that and go on the debate stage and say, I'm very excited that you've agreed to let me choose the vice presidential pick or the secretary of the treasury or something. But I just don't think, they're not honest brokers. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Well, we know that Bernie wants to do the right thing, right? He wants to do the right thing for the country. It's been very well established that that's what moves him. Like someone needs to get in his ear and remind him what a huge liability Biden is. And he shouldn't be out there doing the work for him already, saying that he thinks he could beat Trump. No, like that's the primary case that he needs to be making against Biden, is that he is a dangerous choice to defeat Trump because he won't do it.
I mean, I think it's just a question of like where he's at in terms of, how much he can legitimately say. I mean, the hard part is if you lose all 6 of these, that there's a decent argument that Bernie can't win. Yes. Right? I mean, he can't carry those states that he should carry. The interesting thing is like, what would he ask for at this point?
I don't think it's something around the platform, because I think the platform never
is nothing.
It was
it's
a
nothing.
joke.
It's got to be a personnel type of thing.
I
right?
think it has to be personnel. I think another thing too is that we have to contend with. And again, I think you want to look at this compared to 2008 and then going to 2009. And again, this is assuming like a best case scenario. Biden does well, wins. You get Congress you can work with. The left infrastructure in 2021 would be so much better than in 2009, not just institutions around it, but actually in Congress. Bernie has like a good soapbox in Congress. And, even if Democrats flip the Senate, it's not going to be by much.
Well, and there's also not going to be, frankly, this sort of like, you're not going to have the entire party hypnotized and thinking that Joe Biden is like, we trust Joe Biden. Everybody's just going to be there going like,
Yeah, and again, Obama in 2008, I mean, he was the future of the party, and people were more deferential to that. I think Joe Biden is seen as more of a caretaker, essentially.
Right.
And
who needs a caretaker?
A night watchman.
And so because of that, people might be willing to kind of step up to him a little more because they know that they're not going to contend with him again in 10 years.
Right.
And so I think Bernie, and then like someone like AOC who has a decent following, not just again among the people, but also in Congress, can marshal resources to make sure that like Bernie in the Senate, Bernie can make sure that any nominees that he doesn't like get sunk. And then AOC can make sure any legislation that moves its way through Congress, has to kind of, fit her agenda as well.
I just don't know, like, what do you do in that situation? Do you sign something? I mean, the problem is that like Joe Biden also, they don't have to worry about him 10 years from now. And Joe Biden also doesn't have to worry about them 10 years from now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so that, like, you know, you got a guy who's already coming in saying, I'm not going to run for re-election. That cuts both ways.
And he's already, I mean, knowing how the left, this is what makes me think that they don't care what leverage Bernie has and what the movement can do, is that they came out and enlisted a bunch of bankers. They know what that means. They preemptively published this. It was like when Hillary Clinton, I said this recently, you know, we went through this extraordinary platform fight, right? Where, I mean, it was, if anybody watched that, it was crazy fight with Neera Tanden threatening people. It was outrageous. And we finally banned fracking on the platform committee. And it was very contested, right? 2 days later, Hillary Clinton had a fundraiser with the CEO of an oil and gas company that focuses entirely on fracking.
Just to say F you.
Just to say F you. This is how they play.
I mean, the only thing I could imagine is that, I mean, I think, like, you know, the way to I guess to run that would be, you know, if it's a situation where Bernie, you know, sort of says, like, you know, I'll step out before the debate. It would have to be one of those things where he jams him and just says, like, I have decided to step aside because he has promised me that he will name one of 4 people to be vice president. Right. You know, I don't know which one of those 4 it will be.
And my endorsement will be contingent on which one?
or no. As long as it's one of those 4, I endorse Joe Biden. And the idea being that, like, he has a loaded gun that he puts in the drawer, essentially, you know, to use this sort of like screenwriting narrative. And on that day, when they doesn't pick that person, and they come and they ask Bernie, did they pick that person? All Bernie has to say is yes or no. Mm-hmm. And that, at least, you're maintaining some leverage there, right? Like,
but no matter what happens, whether he says no, the immediate response is going to be, it's Bernie's fault that we didn't get the base. It's these Bernie bros voted for Tulsi Gabbard or her. Don't come after me now.
Right.
Okay?
You're just using an example.
Just using an example. Right. We get all mentions in my comments. She's a friend. They're going to say, you know, they voted for Tulsi Gabbard or Jill Stein. And they try to catch him in these arguments. No matter what he does, he's the blame.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. It's just that there is going to be, like, if there's, you know, the thing is that they have to address what he says in that moment.
Right.
And if they say no, you know, I don't know. I mean, like, it's silly, but I would be like, and I've mailed a letter to myself and the 4 names are on there and this is going to be in the hands of my CPA, you know, from Vermont. And, you know, but all right.
Also Jane.
All right. We got to take now, Aaron, I don't want you to get offended.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
I don't want you to get offended, but we do have an in-house numbers guy as well.
Oh, wow.
John from San Antonio is on the line, and this is no disrespect.
Oh, no. I
understand.
I'm familiar with John.
I like
he
to
does
bring,
good work.
He does do good work. I want both you guys in on this. John from San Antonio, welcome to the program.
Yeah, good evening, Sam. Good to hear from you.
Well, good. I mean, good to hear from you.
It's his show now.
Did I surprise you? Did you not know we were talking?
No, I mean, you know, the phone line wasn't open, so it's playing on my my stereo. But yeah, that's fine. That's great.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I mean, if you have other things you got to do, I don't want to keep you anything. But so, John, what is your sense of this evening? What do you anticipate is going to happen tonight, John?
Oh, well, like I said on Twitter, you know, I'm hoping for the best, hoping for a good night for Bernie. You know, polling obviously doesn't really reflect that. And so I'm just, you know, hoping that he'll beat the polls like he did in 2016 in Michigan, like Jesse Jackson did in 1988 in Michigan also. And so that's what I'm hoping for. Also, you know, it's also good to see that some of the better polls, you know, the margins are a little bit smaller in almost every state. So that's my main hope.
Wait, are you suggesting that the most recent polls are trending to a tightening, or no?
No, I wouldn't say they were trending. I'm saying the polls that have the best reputation show closer races than some of these. I mean, there's a whole ton of polls that have come out recently, just within since the primary has started, that have never been around before. And this is kind of the same thing that happened in the general election in 2016. Unfortunately, in both cases, they've actually been pretty accurate, and so.
Well, Aaron,
who knows? But
let's see. I just want to see what Aaron says about this. We have Aaron Kleinman from Future Now.
So in the earlier primaries, Iowa, New Hampshire, the polls were very good. A bunch of pollsters got, down to like the fourth place finishers, within a few percentage points of accurate. Since the kind of Biden, South Carolina, and then on Super Tuesday, it was just very tough to kind of keep up with the momentum, again, that earned media momentum that went Joe Biden's way over the past week. And it seems like maybe now those polls are catching up with it, and we'll see how good they were. The new polls going into these states have captured significant movement toward him in line with kind of the results from Super Tuesday. I haven't tried to parse out as much kind of the new versus the old, just because, as we all know, there was a huge polling error in 2016 in Michigan. And
that error was supposedly attributable to the fact that it was the first sort of primary they had, or no, excuse me, 2008.
They're modeling off of it.
2008, yeah, in 2008, it was not a contested primary, really, because of the delegate situation, right?
Yeah, because, right, it was...
They'd moved their primary up. The DNC said,
no,
don't participate.
Hillary went after Obama. Hillary, it was a mess.
Campaign there. Obama didn't. Later, Hillary wanted credit for those delegates.
I remember that.
And I had forgotten about that story.
We all remember the Pumas here, don't we?
I still have an email box full of
separate email box?
I have multiple emails.
Make it a book. Be like, take that, Hillary, on Hulu.
I got about 12.
I've got the Puma book.
I probably don't want to do that.
Got a great audience for it. Oh my God.
I had Pumas emailing me as late as 2011, I think. There was a couple of people. I mean, I'm not sure how much it had to do with politics and had to do with.
In late 2011, Hillary was more popular than Obama.
Yeah. So all right. So we have that. So, John, what else can you tell us? I mean, what from your perspective, John, what should we be looking for?
Well, I'm hoping for a win in Washington. That, of course, the problem is we're not going to probably know the results for quite a while. Like in Colorado, I said that it's going to be a while, and I had people emailing me from Colorado, or not emailing me, but on Twitter saying, "No, you're wrong. You had to have to mail it in. I think it was in the Friday before." Or you had to drop it off, on the day of the election, and we should have all the results in within the last couple of days. And right now, I think there's I don't know. Let's see, 40, 32, and 32, and 15. There's 47 out of the 67 delegates that have been allocated so far. So there's still quite a bit out. And nobody really knows what the numbers are. The Green Papers, which is the best source, as far as delegates, has them. I think at 23, 538 has them at, I think, Bernie winning 29. So that's just a huge difference. And so we'll see about that. But I think it's going to be unfortunate, the states that actually have the best, election protocol of having people vote by mail also, as far as the immediate momentum that goes against the candidate who wins those states. And so, not too many people are talking about how Bernie's actually going to win either. The projections are he's going to win either 220 or 221 delegates in California. Right now, 186 are allocated to him. So he's probably going to win, 15 more delegates, and so that delegate lead is going to go down, and he's also going to when obviously delegates in Colorado just talked about, and in Utah there's 10 delegates that are still out. I mean, not huge numbers, but I mean it's going to chip away.
But the bottom line is,
what is it now?
He's got to win a state or two tonight. I mean, that just seems to be literally the bottom line.
He doesn't win Washington. That's not a great sign. Michigan's one thing, but Washington, I think, is what's.
Apparently, it appears that MSNBC is already calling Missouri for Joe Biden. This must be a function.
Biden's like ahead by 68.
As of it is now, he has 980 votes to Bernie Sanders' 394 votes, and so that is a trouncing. I think if there was only 1,200 votes.
Yeah, and I think the exit polls in Missouri were pretty bad for Bernie. And keep in mind, in 2016, Missouri was basically a draw, and it's really kind of shown a worrying trend that I saw starting on Super Tuesday, where you had Bernie in 2016 won a lot of rural Democratic areas. And the thought was that maybe these areas, in an area where 70% of people are Republicans, that remaining 30% of voters, maybe they're like really, open to a different form of leftism and open to his vision of change. And, when all the moderates are kind of Republicans in those areas, you might have a more liberal electorate. As it turns out, a lot of them just really didn't like Hillary Clinton.
Maybe.
Right.
I mean, we don't know for sure. It could be that they're just Republicans not voting. Like they're not. I mean, I agree with you on one hand.
Well, I mean, one thing, and John, I'm going to let you go. Appreciate the talking to you. Thank you for taking the time tonight, buddy.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye. I mean, we don't know, but he's not winning these areas.
Of course.
And we don't know why that is. But, I mean, the most obvious explanation is just that people in those districts really did not like Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. Now, we also see things tonight. I mean, for me, the big takeaway from this election has been that the notion that people vote on ideology in the way that sort of like, we talk about it, I think, at most 50% of the Democratic primary votes that way. I think like in a general, a lot of it is like almost more tribal. In this, particularly this election, I don't know what but I've seen numbers like 70% or 65% are saying, I'm not voting with the person who I agree with. I'm voting with the person who I think can win. And I mean, frankly, I don't know the numbers that it was in 2008, but that was certainly the feeling in, 1993 when Bill Clinton won, and he only won with 45% of the vote. Mm-hmm. That was certainly the feeling I recall, and to some of it with George Bush, was just like someone we really like, and I think he can win at that point. I mean, I think there was probably more split because there was candidates who all sort of like, there was not a huge difference ideologically between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. If anything, Hillary Clinton may have...
The war was a big factor.
Yeah,
the war was a big factor, I think, to a certain extent.
At least with the primary base.
And I mean, I think so, but I don't know with how many, to be honest with you. I mean,
I think Obama's, because the 2008 primary was so close, I think in retrospect, we kind of forget. I mean, Obama barely got more popular votes than her. He ended up, Hillary was surrounded by idiots like Mark Penn who didn't realize that the primaries weren't winner take all. And so Obama was able.
Oh my God.
You didn't know that? Oh yeah.
I don't remember that, to be honest.
Oh yeah, they found out like there was some. I remember there was a story like a third or halfway through the primary, and it sort of came out, and people were just like, "Wait, what?" Well, to be fair, he was also splitting his time, if I remember correctly, as a lobbyist for Columbia.
I was just gonna say he was too busy splitting his time with one of his lobbyist clients.
Yes, like who was like lobbying for CAFTA, I think it was.
Like actually, it's the winner take in Columbia.
Right. Oh, I got confused between which election I was working on. The most important election of my lifetime in Columbia or America. I couldn't remember which one it was.
Yeah, and so Obama was only able to kind of win that. They didn't have to go to a contested convention, or it wasn't even that close, because Obama was smart about racking up delegates in 2008.
And so, well, I mean, we have this situation. Let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, which of course is Elizabeth Warren, and
literally
her. I mean, because what reminded me of this was, I was talking to Dave Weigel today about this, trying to figure out, and Dave Weigel had a theory about what her argument was.
Right.
This was not his. I want to make this clear. It was his speculating as to what her perspective was, which was that she will be able to approach Biden and get something from Biden in the way that she got from Hillary Clinton. In some way for staying out of the endorsement thing. That to me seems super far-fetched because in this instance, there's a different sort of like dynamic here that's at play. The relationship between Joe Biden and Warren in terms of their constituencies is different. And it's even made even more different insofar as like it seems to me that Warren is alienated from a constituency. When she stayed out of the race, there was a presumption that the Venn diagram of her constituency overlapped with a lot of Bernie constituency. But by not endorsing Bernie, she has signaled to those people, like, I'm not necessarily on board with your project in the way that you had, perceived of it. And so, I mean, it seems to me that if Elizabeth Warren wants to do that, she should endorse.
It's over.
Yesterday,
yes,
Biden. She should have endorsed Biden. Or if that was her philosophy, I mean, I don't know why she didn't endorse Bernie, but where is her power base now?
The 5 staffers who still have Adam Green. And Adam Green's, I'm not joking, because 35 members of her senior staff and higher staff have come out and endorsed Bernie Sanders. Her surrogates, most of her surrogates endorsed Bernie Sanders before, like, it wasn't even like an hour after she suspended her campaign. Is that right?
Because you don't hear much reporting about that at all.
Of course not. Why would you? But if you're on Twitter, you were watching people come out and say, I am supporting Bernie Sanders. It's the only way forward. I was paying attention because I was pissed off at some of my friends who had joined the Warren campaign. You have organizations who have at least in name endorsed Bernie Sanders. And I think at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. I mean, the leverage she had was in solidifying the left and going to Joe Biden potentially if Bernie Sanders were not to win and saying, listen, you have a progressive base problem. And if we look at history, no Democrat has ever won without an excited base. Let's just say that. No Democrat has run the presidency in the modern Democratic Party without an excited base. Joining your ticket, can help you deliver that if you want to win.
And the thing is that had she endorsed Sanders,
that's right.
She could have done that.
That's what I'm saying. But now she has no leverage. She has zero.
Who is her constituency? I mean, this is what the weirdest thing to me was about it. Was like, I appreciate someone who is Machiavellian. To say that she is similarly situated this year as it was in 2016 is wrong because the presumption was that she was also representing the people who supported Bernie. And it was much easier for her to make that case because nobody knew. Right. And in 2014 wasn't that far away when everybody wanted Warren to run. And when she didn't in 2015, Sanders stepped in as like, I'm just doing an issue campaign. Had Warren run, I would have stayed on the sidelines. Right. She was still drafting off of that. And it's as if this week she just wanted to say like, hey guys, I'm just not that into you. Like the Warren people that I've seen, I had this argument with, think it's about Warren and Bernie and their personal relationship. Right. And the problem is that most human beings don't find it hard to conceive of the fact that a politician, and I know this happens all the time, but I think most people find it very hard to conceive of the fact that like, oh, you didn't like Betty, you didn't like Bob. Well, looks like there's not going to be health insurance for X number of people, or like there goes universal pre-K. Right. Like what? Are you serious?
Or worse?
Like it's
Trump.
It's like Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? It's like people are just like, oh, I didn't like Steve. He's a jerk. So we're going to kill, 100,000 people or something.
Well, at the end of the day,
dragon.
that's what happens when you have these big institutions that collapse. When the stories, the palace intrigue stories come out, when the what's the woman with
the dragon.
No, oh my God. I'm forgetting the inventor, the woman from Silicon Valley. She's like 35, blonde. Elizabeth Holmes. Yeah. Her story came out.
Yeah,
Theranos, thank
Theranos.
you. Theranos.
Theranos.
When these stories come out and you start to read the details, it really comes down to personnel issues, personalities, people not wanting to challenge the person making decisions, groupthink. And in the case of Hillary Clinton, she had a vendetta against Bernie Sanders that clearly airs out in the open regularly still to this day. And with Elizabeth Warren, one of the reasons why I think I and others went on air the next day and said, be a courageous leader. People are looking to you as a leader to step up and be courageous and fight for their health care and understand what's on the line here. And I think it's on the supporters of Warren to do that as well. And it's also on Bernie Sanders and his team to pressure her on that, because it doesn't look good when you look back at history and she's just a minor point in the history books of a presidential primary.
Yeah.
Well, it might be a major point if it turns out that she was a decisive factor in costing Bernie the nominee.
But that's who writes that. No one's writing that right now except for us.
Yeah, I don't know that she was a decisive factor, but it really. I'm looking at it. I think it's harder to tell that. There's polling now that shows that most of her people would have gone to Biden. Whatever. It's hard to know what the implications of her giving her imprimatur, and stamp of like, this guy can win. He's for reals. That type of thing. But more to in my mind, what is the only thing that you can really assess is like what it's going to do to Elizabeth Warren's career, because I just don't see how, like, it's clear that she never perceived her power base as coming from people, like an outside organization. And
she said that too. She said, Biden was running as a centrist, Bernie was running on the left, and I was in between. What is that?
Right.
Well, it's a left liberal. Yeah. And I think, okay, maybe this is crazy. Feel free to shoot it down. But one thing I was trying to do earlier today was broaden out the conversation beyond Warren herself and say that the lesson that this relatively new social democratic, progressive left movement, whatever you want to call it, should extract from this is not that Elizabeth Warren is a snake or whatever. It's that when you form a popular front with people to the right of you and interests to the right of you, you need to do it. Oftentimes, that's how you get the numbers, but it's a temporary tactical alliance, and you shouldn't be surprised when they stab you in the back unless you have something really concrete to offer them to keep them.
But go ahead.
So we actually have some election results in.
Yes, I was going to say.
In Michigan, Oakland County, which is like the Westchester County there, looks like they have a bunch of early votes in. Biden's got 56% there. And just for comparison's sake, Clinton got 51% there in 2016. So, this is an area that you wouldn't expect to be very friendly to Bernie. It is, it's, mostly well off suburbs. I mean, you do have a significant African-American population there. And it does seem like a lot of those areas still haven't reported their early votes. So it actually, if that tracks with kind of 2016, it looks like Bernie's kind of holding on to some of his voters in those areas at the very least. Now, I think the real question in Michigan, though, is, he won because he wiped out Clinton in those rural areas in Michigan.
Right.
And I don't know if he can do that, but at the very least, he's kind of keeping the margins close in the suburbs, it appears. So, kind of hopefully he'll live on to fight another day.
It's interesting, too. It's going to be interesting to see how that exchange about the guns today plays. Now, maybe it happened too late in the day, but I can tell you, like, the rural Michigan, very gun-ish.
Though, like, Biden's whole thing there, it was kind of like, he was kind of confrontational about it, but he's like, I'm not taking away your Second Amendment rights. I got guns. My son's got guns.
It's hard to know how that whole exchange reads
it is.
To various people.
I think it's, we're all sitting here, like, so plugged in, and you gotta let it percolate for a little bit. So I don't know, but I think would probably happen too late for it to have any
So
meaningful impact.
Washtenaw.
like it's
Here's a question I have for you. Washtenaw County.
Ann
That's
Arbor.
Ann Arbor.
That's got to be a big spot for Bernie if he
Okay,
wants to
right
go
now
out.
he's up 51% to 45% according to my people on the ground there. Is that enough?
No.
No. I mean, the Ann Arbor is the theoretical.
No, I will say we don't know where in the county that's coming from. It has Ann Arbor. It also has some areas like Oakland County, more just kind of like suburban, bedroom communities of Detroit, where you'd expect Biden to do better. So, maybe the Ann Arbor vote will come in late, and but if Bernie wants to do well, he needs to be winning Washtenaw by a lot more than that.
Where else does he need to win in Michigan?
So, there's Ingham County. That's where the state capital. So you have a lot of government workers. Think public sector unions. You'd hope that he would do well among those people. And also, Michigan State is there. You have Kalamazoo, which was even though in kind of Clinton getting wiped in 2016, remained a blue dot. You have Western Michigan University there. You also
Kalamazoo is now even at about 47% each.
How many votes you got in there? There's a big chunk in there. Yeah, so you have a significant chunk of votes in Kalamazoo County. And Bernie, he wants to be doing better in Kalamazoo County because you have a lot of college kids there. It's not as big as Ann Arbor. Western Michigan isn't as big as University of Michigan. But, for comparison's sake, he won that 61-38 in 2016. So that's a disappointing result if it holds for him.
And it also appears that Eaton has just come on the board.
Eaton is like the suburbs of Lansing, and I'm trying to see. So that one, Eaton's another one where he doesn't have to do as well because you'd expect it to be a little more friendly toward. And though he did win it 53-44 last time, so
Bernie did win Eaton last time, 53-44. Yeah, he's at 51-40 right now, but it's early. It seems like you've only got 20%.
And another, I think his theory of being able to kind of stick in this is we know that he got wiped with African American voters in the South, and the thought was that he'd made more inroads among African American voters in northern urban areas as opposed to southern rural ones, which tend to be younger communities as well. And so you'd want to see him do well in Genesee. You'd want to see him do well in Wayne County, which is home to Detroit. Though Wayne County, keep in mind, because it's the biggest county in the state, Detroit typically reports pretty late. And also Michigan this year, they're having their first big vote by mail year. And they estimate that almost half the votes are going to be vote by mail. And the county clerks aren't used to that. And so it might actually take a while for a lot of the results to come in.
All right. Well, I just need to take a moment and say, Saul, it is time for you to go to bed.
Aww.
You're up a little bit later than you should be, buddy. It's time for you to go to bed.
Wash your hands.
What's that?
Is it in wash your hands?
Right. Of course. Wash your hands and don't forget to Ace. I'm sorry. I said that because I have Ace Ventura on my mind, and that it just sort of comes into my conversation to say Ace Ventura.
A little
inside
joke there.
So, anyways,
Too
guys,
insidery.
There is a code going on there that will hopefully send someone to sleep now. They better not be watching anymore. Saul.
That's really cute that he watches you.
Well,
sweet.
It's been rough. It's been rough because Tuesday nights is the night I'm with my kids, and there's been a lot of Tuesday nights. So. But Saul has been very good about it. Good job, buddy. He's 7 now, so he's a lot more mature than he was last week when he was just 6. So,
happy birthday, Saul.
Happy birthday, Saul.
There you go.
And daylight savings time has me all messed up with my bedtime.
Totally.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing.
Totally. It's even worse when you go back the other way.
Really resent having that hour stolen from me.
What's that? What's that floating on the... a couple of just like coronavirus things. Sanders and Biden have canceled their events. Joe Biden is now the winner of Mississippi. Oh, I see. We already have that on the big board.
Missouri.
Yeah.
87% to 10. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not very close. We have the Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have canceled events, which leads me to believe that we are done with campaign events, big public campaign events, right? I mean, if they're canceling them now it's not like, it's possible in September we could see some, but we're done.
Yeah, and it's not just that. I mean, to me, someone who's in politics and trying to run these programs, especially like at the local level, the state legislative level, these events, they're nice, but you don't really need them as much as what you really need are field programs where people go door to door, making sure that people are going to turn out, or trying to persuade voters to turn out. And how are people going to think about a stranger coming to their house asking to vote in a certain way in the middle of a pandemic?
I think what you do is you carry around a 6-foot pole, and that's the way you approach.
But it is like I think with coronavirus, we're seeing just the breadth of it, not just in terms of an economic issue, but really how it changes our society. And we're running up this is a really important election in the middle of it. Like, how does it affect everything? We're still wrapping our minds around that. How do people vote?
I mean, well, there's a couple of things. I mean, let's just take the election, because I think in terms of our society, I think in a year we're going to look at a significant change in the way that our workforce works. And by significant, I mean, I think we're going to have whatever percentage of people start working from home now, I think they're not all coming back. You're going to start to see like managers and we'll say like, I don't know if we need all this stuff where people come in and I can save X amount of dollars by having, these people out there. I mean, I think we're going to see a fundamental change in that, but let's put that aside because that's not what we're here for tonight. In terms of the campaign, I will say this. It occurs to me that if I am working on Joe Biden's campaign and at one point this past week or 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago, if I was really had some foresight, or a month ago, I'm looking at this and I'm going like, I'm the luckiest person in the world because we were getting hammered because Biden's only doing 2 events a week or whatever it is. And now, like, he can't even do one because of coronavirus.
But I think this helps Donald Trump, not just that. I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your point.
I'm not convinced of that either, because I'll tell you why. Let's assume for a moment, and it's a little bit early to do this, I will grant you, but we're playing different scenarios. Let's say Biden is the nominee. Trump can't go out any more than Biden can.
I agree.
There's no, maybe you go and you watch the news, like when he gives press conferences, but they can only get so bat crap crazy at those press conferences. Like the most crazy one was after the impeachment vote, and he had all the senators there, and he's going like, "Hey, Tom Cotton, you did a great job. Stand up," that type of thing. And I just think that's not compelling TV. And I think like any right-wing troll, when they don't have a platform in the same way, it hurts them. We've seen it, remember that guy, Alex Jones?
Remember that guy?
Right? I mean, honestly.
I do. I remember Alex
You
Jones.
see him in the news today?
Well, yes, he is a DWI. I mean, I think we're close to, I think
him.
if you keep Trump off of the campaign trail, I think that's where we would be.
So,
but I think something, can I just add one point? So without revealing the secrets of Matriarch, some of the candidates have asked us. Matriarch is an organization I'm part of that supports working class women running for Congress. And many of them are upstarts, and their campaigns have asked, how do we campaign and petition during...
It's going to be very hard for challengers.
It's going to hurt challengers, but it's also going to hurt a lot of folks. I think it's going to hurt the Democratic Party, because when the Democratic Party stays home, whether it's presidential or local races, they don't do well. Republicans, you can astroturf a little bit more because they'll fall in line. And I think the thing about Trump, yes, he isn't going to be able to play the media the same way, but he will be able to play the media because no one's going to be in the media. And when Joe Biden can't defend himself, and Joe Biden can't shift the media attention away from him, Trump will find a way of doing so.
Well, but my point is that Joe Biden either can or cannot do that. And the fact that he doesn't have to go out on the road is a benefit for him.
Yeah, it's the old Rose Garden campaigns, and both campaigns are going to have to do it. Though I will say, in 2016, if you look at the last few weeks of the election, Trump was actually kind of like more bottled up a little bit and kind of letting the Clinton campaign basically self-destruct with the help of James Comey.
Yeah.
And so, it can be a benefit when all of a sudden Trump is not spouting off nonsense all the time. I mean, that said, if there is going to be a recession, that's definitely not great for Trump.
Right.
Sure.
I mean,
And then it kind of makes all this immaterial.
Yeah, in some respects, we may be. I mean, a recession would put, it would change the tenor of the race dramatically. It seems to me.
It's coming.
And this might be why the Treasury points were brought out. I mean, maybe we're not even thinking that far along that he released who the Treasury Secretary is going to be and went with Wall Street, because for most Americans, there's not a connective tissue. I think this is something actually the progressives need to understand, is we have to message the role of Wall Street not handling the recession properly, because
23% in Biden, up
so.
52 to 44 in Michigan.
Yeah.
Because I still think the majority of Americans think that Obama, a majority of, truly, if he ran against Mitt Romney on this, that he handled the economy properly. And that might be what Joe Biden was signaling there as well. Let's take a cue from 2008, what Obama did.
Right. I mean, I'm a little skeptical of where that came from, to be honest with you.
Of the Treasury Secretary?
Yeah, that list seemed a little bit dubious to me. Like, that would, I'd not.
But it's Politico. Like, they have the newsletter sponsored by Northrop Grumman and stuff. It's,
Right.
you know who their sources are.
I sort of feel like it's one of those situations.
Not the White Hats.
I sort of feel like it's one of those situations like Lanny Davis calls up somebody. Like, hey, I know who the, like somebody trying to make it seem like they're a good source and they need some type of like profile written so they get a job.
Do you remember there was, they said Andrew Cuomo would be his chief of staff?
Yes.
I was talking to people who knew that, and they're like, who told them that?
Andrew Cuomo
wearing
right?
a fake
Of
mustache.
course.
Yeah.
I actually don't think so. I think it's an insult to Andrew Cuomo. It was probably like,
oh, I don't know, a chief of staff.
he doesn't want to be chief of staff. Andrew Cuomo's going to be president.
Well,
Andrew Cuomo is not going to settle for chief of staff.
Well, I mean, it's there's if Joe Biden wins the presidency, Andrew Cuomo has no chance at the presidency this time around.
Really?
But
He could be vice president.
you go in as chief of staff. 2 years later, you're, I don't know, whatever.
A cabinet member, and he was a cabinet member, and then a governor. This is
Could go back into government.
He wouldn't do that. He's not Rahm Emanuel, and he just got mayor.
Who knows? But so I mean, I guess we're now just basically waiting to see what happens. Let's listen to what Gibbs is saying. Is he pushing Uber, or is this what is he doing?
I thought that was Pluff.
Oh, Pluff. I'm sorry. I got confused.
Such dorks.
And I think tonight you're going to see a map with a lot fewer counties colored in for Bernie Sanders and a lot more for the competition.
One of the things that is going to be interesting to watch, too, in Michigan is that after Sanders had that super important win in Michigan in 2016, which again was an upset over Hillary Clinton, and it was a really big deal in the 2016 primary. By all accounts, he seems to have basically left an organizing effort in place in Michigan since then. Sanders has been on the ground doing organizing in Michigan for 4 years.
4 years.
In preparation for this. And so, to Robert's point about what the
They're just
overall
trying to
turnout
make
is
it
here,
seem like this is
obviously,
going to be a
Democrats
bigger
need the
loss
turnout
if
to be
it is
up
a loss.
everywhere, no matter who their nominee is. But if you've got 4 years of organizing under your belt in one of these states, what you ought to be able to show for it is an uptick in turnout, not only for your votes, but for Democrats in general. Registration numbers up, people turning out, people casting votes, the Democratic Party looking stronger. And so that's going to be one of the metrics on which I think the success of Michigan is going to be evaluated, no matter how the delegate math comes down between Sanders and Biden in the state.
And on the turnout question, Joe Biden almost seemed to surprise himself when he talked. I mean, I saw that speech after South Carolina, and he said, and turnout's up, and it's not for Bernie, it's for me. And he seemed as surprised as everybody else. I mean, so far, the sort of volume going up on turnout has been in African-American communities and suburban communities, and it's been for Joe Biden, not Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, and if you look at the exit polls in Michigan, he's been there 4 years organizing. The narrative
also,
of his campaign, I'm going to bring out the young
so-
voters. I'm gonna
Sorry, we
bring
were
out
saying that the vote was up.
in
The youth vote.
Not up.
The youth vote is increasing.
Bring this down a little bit. Yeah.
It's just that it's not increasing by as much as the older vote, and
Right.
and you're seeing kind of a lot of people who for, first of all, I mean, there's not a competitive Republican primary on the other side this time.
Right.
And so you have, especially, in states that aren't closed primaries, you are seeing, independents and even Republicans voting. And despite what some crazy guy in South Carolina is saying, they're not doing it to support Bernie Sanders. Like, if anyone who's really worked in elections before knows, it's really hard. It's not, it's work to get out people to vote for someone they like. It's really, really hard to get them out to go vote for someone they hate.
Right.
And so there's not like them screwing with us by voting for Bernie.
Yeah, and Operation Chaos never worked the first time
but
around.
they are voting for Biden because they like Biden more than Bernie.
That's right.
Biden's not
The Missouri early exit polls, 18 from 29 is down 4% from 2016. 30 to 44 down 8%. 45 to 64 down 2%. 65 and older up 14%. So the numbers, just to be clear, those other cohorts, there's not less voters. It's just that there's so many more 65 and older voters that it has diminished the percentage of where those other people are. So theoretically, you could have, I don't know, you could have, significantly increased all those others cohorts. It's just that that the 65 and older increased their vote share so much that, and I mean, I guess like the tricky part about this, and nobody's figured out some type of special sauce in terms of how to extrapolate this, is we don't know, although it's always been my suspicion, and I haven't seen anybody do a poll about it. The people who are coming out in bigger numbers, did they vote in 2016?
Yeah.
Maybe they're coming out in the primary, but I mean, did they vote in 2016? Are they high propensity voters at that age versus the younger people who are coming out? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's quite possible that Joe Biden is doing much better, is doing very well with African Americans, but those that the cohort that he's doing well with, they're coming out because they're ready to vote against Donald Trump.
Right.
And they're going to be there, whether it's Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders or Cory Booker or, whoever is there, they're going to be there.
Right.
As opposed to Sanders voters who are like, I'm coming out if it's Bernie, but I'm not coming out if it's Biden. Like, there's no way to know that.
So, but one thing on that actually, and I know that there are a lot of vocal Bernie supporters who are saying, I'm not going out to support anyone but Bernie. But the number of the number of Bernie voters who are saying they won't vote for anyone but Bernie right now is lower than it was in 2016, and that number tends to shrink over time.
At least out loud.
At least out loud.
I actually think we're going to have an inverse situation here. I know more people that are like us that are saying, I can't stomach voting for Biden, whereas I was not publicly saying I was supporting Hillary Clinton yet because I was afraid of being annihilated, but knew what we were facing. And I don't know, maybe that's just speculation.
Give it time. Biden will be fine. Everybody's going to feel bad for him, and they'll vote for him.
No, but also, I mean, this gets to kind of this bigger question about, again, I don't want to say that, I don't want people to come away from this thinking that Bernie's toast. Right. I mean, he's doing worse than 2016. And I think, we have to think about 2016 as, going into that year, I think it was 37% of Democrats said they wanted someone other than Hillary Clinton to be the nominee. Mm-hmm. And he ended up getting about 42% of the vote of the pop, all told. And so how much of that was really just people who didn't like Clinton? And so maybe he appeared a little more strong than he actually was. And we're kind of seeing a reversion to what that support actually looks like. But at the same time, a socialist getting this much support in Democratic primaries, unthinkable when I was growing up. And it's and if you look at the exits, this, his cohort is obviously, it's not going anywhere. It's the other voters who are eventually, they're going to slowly take over the party. And it's really just in 2020, how do you build that infrastructure for the future? Barry Goldwater gets blown out in 1964. 16 years later, Ronald Reagan implements his entire program. The Goldwater voters didn't leave the Republican Party. They held their nose for a bit, but also, Reagan was elected governor of California 2 years after Goldwater got blown out. And so it's like, how does the 2020 election fit into that movement building? You know, I mean, I can't tell you one way or the other. If you say that you can't support Joe Biden, I'm not here to tell you that you should, but I'm saying, you know, how does that fit into the long-term vision?
Well, I think the Democratic and the Republican parties are different in the respect that you're talking about, because like you said, the Republicans are willing to dig in and push even further to the right. Like, oh, maybe we lost this year, but then we're going to get Ronald Reagan or whatever. And now we have Trump, who's even further to the right. Whereas the Democrats tend to tack to the right in response to a loss.
Well, and listen, I think moving forward, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are different parties, and it's everybody but the people who are against corporate interests. Let's just make this very clear. Everybody shifts to the right because they don't want to go with anything that challenges the corporate infrastructure right now, at least since 1978. But moving forward, the infrastructure that we have to focus on, and I hope that a lesson from tonight and moving forward on is, it's not just about being left-leaning. And like you were saying earlier, you know, we partner up with these organizations that are like left-light or say they're progressive, but then don't stand with us in solidarity. And moving forward, we have to actually understand this process. I mean, I scream this from the mountaintops, but they crushed us. The Democratic Party is not an actual party. It's an illusion. There aren't active members. They've never really voted on things until a couple of years ago. Everybody who makes a decision has been appointed by Tom Perez, and Tom Perez was appointed essentially by Barack Obama. So it is on us right now to pay attention when it's not hot on MSNBC,
Right.
and it's not a fight,
Right.
but pay attention at the local level and not just run for races. That's important. But when you don't have staff to support the candidates running, because that's really happening right now, you should also go out there and learn about what to do, how to run a field operation.
Right.
Not just say it and then start a consulting firm. We're talking about really getting into the nitty gritty. That's what they do. And if the numbers are on our side, and they have been since the late 70s, frankly, you know, the Republicans outmaneuvered us. They redistricted the entire country, and the Democrats zapped all the money from the state parties, and we've been annihilated. It is on us right now to make sure that the 70% of Democrats that are under 50 who supported Bernie are in power in the next 4 years.
And as someone who works at an organization, Future Now, futurenow.org.
Donate.
No, and we are, you know, and so we saw exactly this happen. We saw, I don't know how familiar everyone here is with the Powell memo, but former, you know, 1972, right? And there's the conservative movement. Trump, he sits on a tripod that Lewis Powell did that came up with. It's taking over states, taking over media, taking over the judiciary. And media and judiciary, I have no idea how we get those back. Right. You're trying, Sam, and I appreciate it.
Are you running
on
for
both
judge?
chords, frankly.
Yeah. But in terms of state legislatures, you know, future, and what you see there is that there's just the barriers in state legislatures are just so lower to entry for people who are really interested in making a difference. It's where you can make the biggest difference. So regardless of what you think, what you think of Joe Biden out there, there will be a state legislative candidate near you who feels the way that you do, but still needs your help in November. And so even if if Bernie loses,
that's a great way, actually, of being excited, helping the cause, but not feeling like you're actually having to help. In other words, like, you can help a state legislator, and you will drive votes for Joe Biden inadvertently. And, you know, you don't have to feel like you are to bring out votes for this state lawmaker, and you can sort of like have your cake and eat it.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, when you actually go out there and do voter contact, you're not saying vote for Joe Biden too. You're just going to assume they've already heard about the guy. Mm-hmm. You're going to say vote for, you know, Jade Barr. She is a DSA member who holds a swing seat in Montana. You know, like, you know, there are legislators, and we work with legislators from really across the Democratic ideological spectrum. We kind of feel like, you know, there's 50, you know, right now, 53% of Americans basically want to use government to improve people's lives. And they want things like, you know, good healthcare, good jobs, clean water, clean air. like two of the best polling issues that Democrats everywhere should run on are clean water and rural broadband. Those are something like 70% of voters support those things. That's how you can win anywhere. And like, if you run on improving people's lives, regardless of you can win in, purple to red districts based on a platform that really focuses on those outcomes, showing people how government can make their lives better.
This is interesting. I mean, we've seen this consistently now where they're asked, there's a poll that's out there that's been asking in every exit poll, where are you on this statement? Replace all private insurance with a government plan. And it has been consistently, I think it was like 14 out of 16 states in Super Tuesday or something to that effect.
Well, Paul is saying 17 in a row right now.
Oh, all right. Well, there you go. I mean, 17 in a row states where the phrase "replace all private insurance with a government plan" is supported by significant margins.
Yeah.
I mean, if the Democrats or Republican won with that that difference, that would be a monumental landslide.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're and it's hard to know, like, well, I feel comfortable saying this because now I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, who just said that he would veto it, or not sign it, pocket veto it, I guess. If it passed a Democratic Congress and a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, I mean, that's.
I find it hard to believe he'd veto something that Joe Manchin votes for.
Well, that's the thing is like even when they came out and issued a corrective, it was still sort of.
I mean, to me, I saw it sounded like he was doing the. I see what Joe Biden's doing. He is trying to be kind of like the post-political figure to unite the country to take on Trump. So he's taking very few public stances, and it drives people crazy. And it is, and if
it's a public stance that if the Democrats, if somehow,
so I mean, but his corrective statement was he's really doing his best to not take a stand.
It's just he did not say veto.
He did say veto, but just like not in the order that he was supposed to say it. And I don't know.
Insane.
It seems like everyone's giving up a little too early on Bernie.
It does,
staying in the game.
Well, I mean, look, I would much rather be, get excited in 20 minutes when, Michigan closes. Then
just jaded. Let's
manage our expectations.
I mean, look, people have voted more or less. I hope, there may be people in line and we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I personally, I am in the, I am firmly in the camp that there really is no circumstance where Bernie shouldn't have this debate.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where I am. And but I don't have to be the person who feels that pressure. I'm going to go home. I think after I'm going to go to MSNBC tonight. So I'm going to go home at 3 a.m. Nobody's going to say, Dad, what's the story? Is he going to drop out? Nobody's going to say that to me. So I don't know. But in my mind, I think that if Sanders doesn't stay in, that come September, if Biden can't actually make it through an hour and a half debate, they're going to be like, it was selfish of Bernie to drop out and not actually give Biden a warm-up thing. Right?
So they're going to figure out a way to blame the left no matter what happens. I think that's a fair prediction.
And I have a pretty good normie Democrat focus group in my parents. They love Biden, but they also they want to see him make it through a debate. I think, yeah. I think if Bernie, even if he loses Washington and Idaho, I think he has a case to make that, hey, we've been fighting against this kind of earned media onslaught. We know his antipathy for corporate-owned media. And he said, I just need to take my case to the people. We're going to have this debate, and then we're going to see how the other primaries play out.
And, I think in that debate, I'm not saying that Bernie has to go right at Joe Biden at all. I mean, I think depending on what the results are here. I mean, if I'm Sanders, I can go in. again, contingent upon what the results are. But I can make a case to myself, I'm going to go into that debate because this is going to be the last national platform I have in front of Democrats, maybe for a long time.
Speak at the convention.
Maybe I'll speak at the convention, but I mean, this could be it for months. And that convention, may not be a convention. I mean, the idea of the convention
It'll be a Zoom call.
Yeah. Right. I mean, honestly, this could be the last time that I have sort of like this level of attention, and I'm going to continue on with this movement. And if Biden can't just make it through the 2 hours without me, with just questions from an audience, that's up to the Democrats to decide. He doesn't really have to go after him to sort of provide at least your parents with the sense that at least Joe's not going to pass out after 45 minutes, which, look, I think it's, we haven't seen Joe Biden exhibit any type of basic stamina in the context, in these debates. Yes. Okay. He's been standing for 2 hours. I mean, okay. But we're talking 15, 18 minutes of talking. Many times he says, that's my time, right? I can end now, right? I can stop talking. And I think the Democratic Party, it would go a long way to soothing some anxiety if the guy could show I can do a 2-hour sit down conversation. And Sanders can go out there and just make his pitch. He doesn't necessarily have to go after Biden, I think. And I think he will calibrate that based upon how well they do tonight.
He could. I see him with Bernie's personality using that platform to talk about the Democratic Party's platform and what kind of party we need to have moving forward without attacking him, saying this is what needs to be on the agenda. I mean, of course, we all wish Bernie were a little bit more political and he could hold up Biden on that stage and say, I'm so excited that you have agreed,
right.
all those things. But that's not inherently who he is. And I can see him just using this as an opportunity to push for a platform that is progressive, that represents, all working people. But at the end of the day, I mean, to go to your point, Jamie, yes, okay, there are clearly some paths left, but looking at the numbers and understanding what we're facing, we have to prepare ourselves for the potential of what happens tomorrow and understand that we also have some leverage as humans, as a movement, to push on the Democratic Party, to push on Joe Biden to really stand up for the issues that we care about. I mean, there are children in cages, not entirely due to Donald Trump, but because of the deportation policies of the Biden-Obama administration. So what I advise the movement to do, if it does go sour tonight, is not sit there and scream at Elizabeth Warren and not even scream at the Democratic Party. And boy, do I hate the Democratic Party. And there are such jerks.
No, they got to go.
They got to go. I say use this moment to push as far as you can and embarrass the Nearitannans of the world for not supporting Medicare for all when the majority of Democrats have come out and said that they support it. And say this is about the next generation.
Eyes on the prize. Eyes on the prize. Yeah. Eyes on the prize. Use what you have to push the agenda forward. And part of that has to be a function of where is the ground that you can make up, as opposed to lamenting that the ground that you don't have.
I'm still
Don't
not
get mad
totally
organized.
satisfied with, I'm not a wonk, okay? Maybe this is a dumb 2-part question. But you're saying that if Bernie can't win tonight, then he probably can't win the general, right?
No,
And
no, I'm not
The
saying
nomination.
that. I'm saying that it becomes hard for him to make the argument.
Sure. And I'm saying we've always known that the primary was going to be tougher for Bernie than the general for any number of reasons, not just DNC malfeasance, although there probably is that going on, but just so many institutional barriers, voter suppression, what have you.
Well, there's not going to be any less of those things in the general.
Sure.
And
But we
moving
know
forward, the states moving forward, just to make that very clear, there's a lesser chance of Bernie winning those states. So that's why the path narrows for him not to get the nomination. I mean, there's a chance, but it's still...
No, I know. The outcome tonight, it affects how people are going to vote going forward, for sure. But like, in terms of these electability arguments, does it matter that so many of the states Biden's won have been red states, considering elections are largely about exciting the base and persuading independents, who Bernie does very well with?
Well, if he doesn't win Michigan, if he doesn't win Washington, then that argument is not really at play.
And also, it's, a red state, blue state. They're also pretty heterogeneous. I mean, in Michigan, you talk about, you have a very, like, Detroit is a very blue city. You also have a very, like, that votes like New York City, basically. And then you have, like, the Upper Peninsula in the northern part of the state, which basically votes like North Dakota. And so, you look at kind of how they do in the individual Democratic primary constituencies there. There's not great evidence that there's kind of a one-to-one on you do well in a primary versus you do well in that area in a general. But it's instructive in kind of seeing how they'll do moving forward. And we're looking at.
I want to look at this. We get some exit polls.
66 Biden, 29 Sanders.
I think this is in Michigan.
Basically,
Yeah, it's
what
Michigan.
it looked like 4 years ago. It was 68-30. Go ahead. Sorry. Back to you, Brian.
Hang on here. Sorry to interrupt. Here you have it. Our projected winner in the state of Michigan, Joe Biden.
Joe Biden's
Steve,
been.
I'd only interrupt you for something like that.
I thought that's what was coming, and the numbers I'm about to show will explain exactly why. So you can see here, again, the black vote, basically the same. It's off a few points, but it's basically what it was 4 years ago in the state. Where you see significant movement in Michigan tonight from 4 years ago, it is among white voters. Check this out. First of all, this is white voters with a college degree in Michigan. You see Biden is winning this group 51-46. He lost them 4 years ago to Bernie Sanders, and white voters without a college degree in Michigan.
Kornacki's good. He's allowed to slip up.
He lost them big 4 years ago. In fact, overall,
Kornacki is,
Clinton lost.
He's really handsome, so you don't think he knows his stuff, but he really does.
4 years ago, Bernie Sanders won the white vote in the Michigan
type,
primary
but-
by
What?
14 points. Tonight, he is losing it by
not our
6
types.
points. A 20-point swing among white voters in Michigan. The black vote basically unchanged from before, and so that accounts
he's
for
handsome
what's
for an
happening in
election
Michigan
walk
tonight. And
also.
just to
How
show
about
you, again, we've been taking you from county to county here. 51% of the vote is in. It is a double-digit lead for Joe Biden. That shift, it pops up in places like Macomb County, and not a ton here in, but it's a 10-point lead. This was a squeaker. Macomb County, the blue-collar county there, just north of the city of Detroit. They wrote that famous paper a generation ago about the Reagan Democrats. They were talking about Macomb County. This is a place where Hillary Clinton had trouble in the general election 4 years ago, but you see Joe Biden doing significantly better here than Hillary Clinton did. You go next door to Oakland County. This is sort of demographically, this is very different than Macomb. This is upper income, a sort of upscale economically, but Biden winning this by 18 points 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton eked it out by 4 exploding to 18 points. You take a look here, College County, again, Sanders is barely carrying this right now with about a fifth of the vote in. This was a double-digit Sanders win 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we talk about the small counties, the small rural counties. This is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. 4 years ago, basically the entire Upper Peninsula was won by Bernie Sanders. I believe there was one county he lost by 30 votes. Tonight, you're seeing so far all Biden blue up here. Here's a county where 100% is in. Not a ton of voters, but again, look at the swing from 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton got 35% here. Joe Biden getting 57%. So 4 years ago right now at this time, we were telling you a story of a Michigan that was very close. We were telling you a story of a Michigan where Hillary Clinton had won the black vote, but the white vote, especially the non-college white vote, was going to Bernie Sanders. Sanders was racking up all these wins in small rural counties of Michigan. 4 years later, you see the small rural counties, but for a few exceptions, coming in Biden blue. You see big Biden numbers in the densely populated areas, even Wayne County. This is Detroit, and not just Detroit. There's a lot outside of Detroit in this county, nearly half of it in. You see Biden leading by 10. This is one place In fact, the only place right now on the map where Biden is not yet at the Clinton level. I think you've got a lot of the city of Detroit that will account for the other half of the vote to come in here. So I would expect that number to rise for Joe Biden. But again, 4 years ago, Michigan foreshadowed something that happened later in the general election. Non-college white voters in Michigan who Democrats had depended on to deliver them the state for a generation defected from Hillary Clinton and made Donald Trump president. One of the questions that is immediately raised by this result tonight, seeing Joe Biden do so much better in these places than Hillary Clinton did, where you see a lot of non-college white voters, is Joe Biden more acceptable to those voters than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago? He certainly appears to be in the primary. Will he be if he gets to the general election?
I mean, one thing that happens, I think there's this pervasive feeling that Trump's unbeatable sometimes. Like there's the Trump is magic theory where just everything he does. I mean, he's never been very popular. He barely beat like a tanking campaign. Right. And really a Democratic candidate has to be marginally more popular than Hillary Clinton to win. And
the only, I mean, I agree with that, and that has been my theory for an extended period of time. I have like a special concern about Biden. I think is like sort of like literally a material one. I think, like I say, I think the idea that he doesn't have to go and campaign, like I think that it's almost impossible to sort of like assess how much of an advantage that is for Biden. Because it's like the difference between, a company saying like, we're going to offer all sorts of benefits to our company, to our employees, or we're going to raise the minimum wage just unilaterally, as opposed to like everyone having to raise the minimum wage, and then it becomes just something that everybody has to adjust to, as opposed to a competitive advantage for somebody else.
But he's a sitting president, so he could.
But the difference between last time and now is that he's an incumbent, and he has full operational control of the machinations of the government to use in a way that I don't think we've ever seen an American president use.
Nixon.
Maybe. I think that Bill Barr is just like, Nixon had to hide it, right? Like, I think what they are willing to do and what they have attempted to do, frankly, and what I'm quite convinced they're going to do going forward is going to put Nixon to shame.
Yeah. I mean, that is the X factor. It's like, they're basically going to turn the law enforcement and intelligence apparatus against Democrats. But also keep in mind, that was another thing that happened to Hillary Clinton. The law enforcement, I mean, if you look at kind of the timeline to the Comey letter, it's basically the FBI New York office was they called it Trump land.
Yeah.
And
you don't have to tell me about there's nobody who's been talking about the New York FBI office more than me. And I'll throw Felix Sater into that too. But we that's like a different show. But we can discuss that after.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm taking from you guys now is that Trump might win again because, zooming out a bit, none of the social forces that brought us Trump have substantially changed since 2016. If anything, they've intensified. Voter suppression has intensified in many places with Republicans making the laws. And Biden is running approximately the same kind of campaign as Hillary Clinton, or he will be. He's putting together the same coalition.
It's not the same
that she lost with, or at least that's what Hillary said.
And 2018 would say that you're wrong about that. I mean, and I would add, Michigan has a Democratic governor. Wisconsin has a Democratic governor.
Pennsylvania had repressive laws, recently that they just
Yes, although that 200,000 voters was reversed. Yeah. I mean, you regardless of even statutory things, you have a government that's controlled by Democrats who are actively attempting to even like sort of maybe to the extent that they're constrained, subvert those.
Exactly. And so, again, the federal government might be answering to Trump, but the state governments now, you've seen Democrats take back power. Then another thing about why states matter, futurenow.org.
And on that note, with that, even in the primaries, I mean, this is we love as Democrats to talk about voter suppression, but there is quite a bit of voter suppression. So going back to the red to blue, the general election versus primary election argument, these states are not necessarily indicative of the general election because the voter laws in the primary election are different.
Right.
And you can't, when you say, oh, the youth didn't turn out, like, okay, let's look at New York State. New York State, up until this year, had the most closed primaries of any Democratic state, so much so that it has the second lowest turnout out of all the states in the United States as a Democratic state. And so you look at the youth vote in New York and you'd think there are no young people. But that's just obviously not true. Mm-hmm. So you have to factor these things in when you're saying like the youth vote is down this year and the older vote, not to mention the generational changes. And how does that flip to the general election? When you don't invest in these, when you don't have open primaries and you don't have reformed primaries and caucuses, you're not investing in the generation that is not turning out. So you say youth vote is out, or you're saying you're not getting new voters. Well, they're likely not to show up in the general if they're not being invested in the primary. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if there's low turnout in the primary, sometimes that doesn't flip on the general.
Right.
You're not investing. Those people don't show up in the primary, they're not going to show up in the general, possibly.
Well, it seems like a lot of Bernie's electability pitch is based on stuff that we can't really know yet. Yeah. Like you were just saying, the turnout's going to be different from the primary to the general. Yeah. And he's making his argument on turning out non-voters or people who sometimes vote but don't always, as well as persuading independents and a small but electorally substantial and significant slice of working class swing voters. And no one's really tried that in recent history. So it's really hard to say if it's going to work or not. What I do know is that Biden running on the same old politics is, I do not believe, going to be enough to win this election.
So I am, a year ago, I was worried that Biden was going to run. They had the same liabilities that Clinton did, just like this long career in politics, and being a Democrat in the 70s and 80s and 90s meant you support a lot of not great things. And a lot of bad things. And he has this family member who continues to. We're gonna know more about Hunter Biden. To be omnipresent
in the next 5 or 6 months. We're going to learn more about Hunter Biden than probably any single.
He just wants to do art with his Israeli girlfriend. Leave him alone. And so he does have the same liabilities as Clinton. I think one thing to keep in mind around him is he does. Clinton. I think Clinton's biggest mistake was that she made the election about Trump. She had the fewest issue-based ads of any campaign in modern history. And she was surrounded by all these people who for years were saying, Hillary Clinton, you're so great. And you just gotta let the people, and as it turns out, being dragged for 30 years, especially by right-wing media, it turned out a lot of people didn't like her for whatever reason.
Well, there was literally hundreds of people whose entire career was the industry of slagging the Clintons.
Exactly.
There's no analog to that.
And I feel
in
like
American.
In 2016,
maybe Kennedy conspiracy.
In 2016, we kind of just collectively, Democrats kind of collectively blinded ourselves to that. We thought she was still at her Secretary of State popularity apex still, when she really wasn't. And so Biden hasn't suffered.
Yeah, I was like, some people that was their argument. Enough. That was their argument.
I think that, I was certainly.
Well, the argument was she has been so vetted that it can't hurt her, as opposed to she has a tremendous amount of baggage that could be in any way ignited at any point.
And so Biden hasn't had that. He hasn't had just the decades of onslaught that she had on her. And so he doesn't have as much baggage necessarily. And then, I'll come out and say, if we have second quarter bad GDP growth, that's a pretty good
Right.
correlate to the incumbent not doing well in the election. I mean, and that's another thing. And again,
Biden's
it's like,
not running on the same platform as Clinton is because Trump has been president for 4 years.
Yeah.
And that is I mean, look, in 2018, we had the greatest turnout that Democrats have had in the midterms, and it was not because people were like, "I am so excited at this, at this Congress person." It is because people came out and wanted to basically stop Trump.
Yeah.
And they fought locally too. I mean, it wasn't just about Trump. That was part of it, yes.
Well, no, I mean like people on the ground
IEC, for
did what they
instance.
needed to do, but I'm sorry, like there's just no way that for whatever reason we had, it's all part of a whole, right? Like you had many more places where people were challenging because they were mad at Trump.
Right.
And they were, mad about how the election went. Like all of that still exists. And I think
it's weakened a lot. Maybe I'm just, I mean, I think we're seeing it just in numbers internally.
Have we seen that? I mean, is that the case? Do you think is it your sense that the enthusiasm from 2018 has waned?
A little, I would say. I mean, especially because, for example, from 2017 to 2018 in special elections, Democrats vastly overperformed. And I would say really since the primary got into full swing, Democrats have taken their eye away from special elections. In fact, there's a special election in the Philadelphia suburbs a week from now in a seat that Clinton won. And, it's a pretty close race. It's, like in 2017 or 2018, the special election would have been in the bag already. Right. Because it's but like, you're seeing that Republican voters, Republicans are turning out. Like
they turned out in record numbers in 2018 as well.
But like in the specials, they weren't. But the Republican voters, at least, I mean, hey, the past few weeks have shown a lot of cracks in Trump's armor, which I did think that wasn't that great to begin with. But he still got 100,000 people to come out in the middle of winter in New Hampshire and vote for him in a meaningless primary. That's not worth nothing. Like Republicans are enthused, and they're out voting in these special elections. And Democrats, I think, are kind of taking their eye off the ball a little bit for a lot of these special elections coming out. So obviously, if you're in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, vote Howie Hayes March 17th.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. Okay. I think more about like. You're seeing in 2018, like we saw both sides come out a lot, and Democrats had more people come out, and that was amazing. And I think what we're seeing now is Republicans, they're enthused as well, and they're showing up more, and they're showing up early, and that is a worrying sign. But also, again, we've seen coronavirus take a hit off Trump's numbers, and if you look at polls, there are so many people that say, well, I don't like Trump personally, but he does a great job, keeping things going. And, if we're in a
401k is right. I mean,
if we're in a recession and you're not allowed to leave your house other than for an emergency, all of a sudden it doesn't seem that great anymore. And,
right.
And like grandma, is really sick. And
I mean, yes, I mean, that's the one thing that I think like we're at a point now where we have,
but also
we are in really uncharted territories as to what's going to happen over the next 6 months.
And the one thing,
country.
the countervailing thing with coronavirus and everything happening right now, yes, it's being horribly botched right now by Trump. But the one thing that Republicans have always been able to rely on to get their people out is fear. And if they can create enough fear around coronavirus and fear around society changing around them, if they can turn that into some type of fear-based, and I'm sure they'll try. I don't know how successful they'll be.
This thing came from China.
Exactly.
I have one pause on that for a second, though, because even in the last 4 years, the demographics have changed so much that those base Republicans, and I don't know if it's enough people, like Trump didn't just win with old, crazy right-wing Republicans. He won with wealthy centrists. He won with wealthy center-right people, the Scaramucci's of the world, and probably some wealthy, center-left people who were a little bit sexist, right? So you have to sit here and think, is that fear mechanism as potent as it was 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago? Are those 85-year-olds that were sitting there watching Fox News, still alive? Will 65-year-olds fall for the same stuff? I mean, that might still be tuned into cable news. And is it a large enough number to actually play
I mean,
that
there's
game?
also a very simple way of also just sort of looking at this. does misogyny, in terms of the national vote, is that worth 0.5% of the vote?
That's right.
And then you have won the difference between Clinton, like 5 times over, right?
Well,
like,
That's
but
the
then
Biden
there are
model.
other X factors, right? Because Hillary, for all her faults, she could string a sentence together.
Well,
and
that is.
Oh, we know.
That is exactly.
Sometimes
that
too
is
often.
exactly why I think like we need to have
the
debate.
Biden is very vulnerable on that
No,
front. I also wonder
sentence structure.
like we know that Trump is going to get up on stage versus a corporate Democrat and run to the left of him on things like racial justice and trade. And like you said before, Sam, that's probably not going to persuade that many people, but it could depress turnout on the Democrat side.
It definitely. I mean, that's my concern.
I will say, I've been here an hour and a half, and I'm kind of feeling it's like, I get it, Joe Biden. It is hard to kind of come up with coherent sentences all the time. Being on there, I don't know how you do it, Sam.
Well, I mean, all Joe Biden has to do is basically do what you've done tonight, and he will be the nominee. Yeah. Like if he can just sit through and talk as much as you have, then he will be the nominee. But and I think you've done quite well.
Oh, thanks.
Frankly, with all due respect, better than Joe Biden.
Yeah, Sleepy Joe's got nothing on you.
And he's been preparing for this his entire life.
I did just turn 35. So
yes. Well, I will say, when you were in your late 20s, you were a little bit sharper. You lost a step.
Well, I mean, I will say, if I want to go back to my pro-Biden focus group of my parents, I'm like, aren't you worried about Joe Biden? My dad's just like, Reagan won twice.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so Joe Biden will be our president.
Well, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, I think there's a lot more latitude. Older people have a lot more latitude about these things because to a certain extent they experience it themselves. And it's hard to sort of say like, most people don't say like, I'm not qualified to do what I'm doing. Like I think there's more latitude with that. And it's not like people, look, there's no doubt if you took, I don't care what their ideology is, the reporters who have been following Joe Biden for the past 25 years, to a person, they would all say he's lost a step. And that's,
right.
They have said it publicly.
And I would say losing a step is different than senility.
That is correct. And really, to me, it's more of a question of honestly, this is like the idea that he's not going to have to do the rigors of the campaign and is not going to have to justify that is huge. And it's like, there is no, like, Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, how hard is it to imagine Donald Trump going up and going like, in the paper today, Joe Biden's only done one campaign. This is my third rally this week.
Right.
And Sleepy Joe, he can't do it. And the amount of like media attention that would have garnered, just sort of like that relentless attack that he like, but now it's just like, I'm responsible. Like every time you point out, if you're Donald Trump, like he's not going out, it's because you botched the coronavirus.
If they're sharp enough to make that point. And I think that's the question. Okay, so here's my,
come on.
I'm going to take a moment here.
Like,
is it worth us even talking about his senility anymore? I mean, they're going to throw it at us. The centrists are going to throw it at us saying that we're the ones who made that a point you've seen the papers in the last week that it's all the Bernie bro narrative. I think the question is, how do we adapt moving forward? I know the leftists are going to hate me for saying this, but let's be real.
I agree totally. On the day that Sanders is out of the race,
yes,
in my mind, like the issue of Biden's weakness becomes far more analytical than it does advocacy in terms of what
That's
I
right.
do, as far as I'm concerned, because there is no sort of like going back. And as much as, I saw Bhaskar Sankara on Twitter today make this point. As much as, the DNC and Tom Perez and nobody wanted Bernie, all of that is sort of baked into the cake. The fact of the matter is they did not get enough votes. Mm-hmm. And there was not the sort of to the extent that there was any structural obstacles to Bernie Sanders, those are long-time societal structural, disadvantages. Like,
which matter.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that they matter, but my point is this, is that like the media has been like this for 40 years, maybe more. That was not set up to prevent Bernie Sanders from winning. It was set up in part, I don't even think it was set up to stop a Bernie Sanders from winning, but it was set up in such a way that it would stop. And so if at the beginning of this campaign, if you're going to say like, there's no way for Bernie Sanders to win because the media is corporate, okay, don't run, do something else. Take that.
Or, or you have to try to build something.
Exactly. I'm just saying we can't, the idea of like complaining that Joe Biden won is not useful. Right. And it's like, it's not useful.
Or
it's only useful insofar as it catalyzes useful organization on the ground.
But does it?
I'm not convinced that it does.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Seriously, we have to think about, isn't it the ideas always win? Seriously.
No.
I mean, so here's, no. I mean, that's the, no, but I mean, ideas on the ground. If you're going on the ground, it's not bitching about Joe Biden that's going to get people to the polls. It's going to be the ideas that get people to the polls.
But I'm saying, if the left is stinging from Bernie losing this primary, I would hope that would be inspiration to build the kinds of working class institutions that we're going to need to see victories, not only on the electoral level, but I believe that will come if we build the base for it, passing the kinds of policies that we want, no matter who's in office.
But that's different from being upset that Bernie lost and feeling, being upset about that is different from saying that like, there was that something was unfair or that it was rigged or that it really is more like there's more work that needs to be done. Now, from my perspective, and you and I have a slightly different ideological perspective, like there needs to be growth of this movement that goes outside of the working class. Like there needs you need to bring on allies that
100%.
That are are maybe sort of sympathetic to this movement, but aren't necessarily working class.
Like Rebecca Traister today, who slammed Joe Biden. Her entire article was Joe Biden can't be president.
I can tell you that she is like, she was a Warren supporter, but like she would vote for Bernie over Biden in a second.
Look, I believe in the existence of altruistic liberals because that is who I come from.
But my point is that like even that take is basically saying F you to them.
Right.
I mean, like
he's right there.
Like if I'm an altruistic liberal, and maybe I am, I don't know where I fit on that spectrum. But if someone called me that, you know what I would say? Go suck it.
And
I think like
altruism is good.
That's great. And if you meant it in not a drippy, condescending way, but I'm just saying that like there's got to have to be a way of like articulating these allies, even if you have to do it like even if it's performative, you got to do a better performance because Bernie Sanders should have had more of an opportunity to win. And there were things that I think like that were surrounding that campaign that it's not unclear to me were helpful to the campaign that may have been detrimental.
Yes.
Sure. I mean, I'm not against forming tactical alliances.
No, I know. But if you say it that way, the people are going to go like, "Oh, I'm against being used as a."
But also, we're not the ones who have the power. So saying it's like a tactical alliance from like the renegades is like they can just be like, "Cool, we write the rules. Fuck you." So, seriously, I mean that's how they deal with you and us. Like we have to have a moment here to realize we don't write the rules. We may be able to pressure them. But we don't write the rules. And until we write the rules, we can't sit there and say, we're thinking about doing a tactic. I don't know if I should have a conversation with Rebecca Traister or not because she shit on me on Twitter. No. We need to build our movement. We need to talk to our grandparents and our parents. I'm sorry. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with this woke shit. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with DSA being like, I'm challenging the kind of progressive, but not fully progressive assemblywoman in my district. Sorry. Like, we have to be smart and strategic. And this isn't about you. I'm just frustrated with a lot that's going on in DSA because it is about purity. And there's a reason why that they look at liberals as snowflakes, because we act like fucking snowflakes. We've got to be smart. And that includes the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I'm sorry I'm having a moment. I'm very frustrated. I spent the last 6 years of my life fighting so that this Democratic Party primary was easier. And you had a bunch of people swoop in and say, okay, now we need to make it about Twitter.
Right. I mean, I think that happened, frankly, to the center to the left. I think that certainly, I think Warren significantly underperformed just in terms of like what her potential was in terms of the left. I still am of the mind that based upon my survivor strategy, that like you want the bigger target in there for as long as possible. And she forgot her value proposition. And I think a lot of it is because their campaign was also just sort of like very myopic about Twitter. Look at this, James Carvell. He looks like he's going to just explode with joy.
As far as like the thing, like the workers need to build we need to build a bridge to the professionals. I think like the problem is, especially with this primary, is that the professionals thought that they could get ahead of like the actual workers with the Warren campaign. And it was clear that they never had the votes. They never had the rank and file of the Working Families Party. They never had the people behind them. I think like it's great to have smart people on the inside. I think we need that, but I don't think they're going to get there until we like blunt it through with people power.
Well, I mean, I think the problem with the Warren campaign, and I think that, the calculation she has made with this endorsement, to me, signals that she does not see value in having people. She does not. There is a complete absence of an awareness of the power of populism, and to the point where, like, I think that and I say this with regret, I think that she's going to find that she has no power base, and the big question for me in terms of Warren in this campaign was like, I am quite convinced of her abilities, and I think they surpassed Sanders. I mean, maybe it was, who knows if they were in different contexts. But in terms of where she shined was like that inside game of politics. And the question in my mind was like, can she marshal the resources that exist out in the people? Yeah. Like you have different places where you have power that comes from.
Her inside game is brilliant. Her outside game, and her political instincts have just been terrible.
I think that it has occurred to me in the course of this lack of endorsement that, and I don't blame Bernie's loss on her. I'm talking about in terms of her career. It has occurred to me that not only does she not have an outside game, she does not think there's a value to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's like the platonic philosopher king. She's not like a president.
I mean, the problem is that like they perceived the endorsement of Bernie in terms of the value it brings to Bernie. They never assessed what it did to her.
That's right.
Right.
Like, and from my perspective, I was like, when I saw this was going down, I was just like, she's lighting herself on fire. Because that, like, her ability to negotiate with Clinton came because there was a perception that Bernie's people were with her too. And she just announced to them, like, I'm not with them.
Is that just like the Joe Roast bars in her ear? Like the groupthink around her?
The first time that I ever became aware of the concept of policy as personnel was in the context of reading about her. I don't know, 10 years ago. Whatever it was. And so
that's interesting.
My answer is yes and yes. Like, I don't know. But
and I think the same thing with Bernie, going back to my little moment just now. And I appreciate you dealing with me, Jamie. I just have to say sorry. But it wasn't targeted at you. It was just you said DSA and it got me worked up. I say this because I think that Bernie tried to overcorrect some of the mistakes of 2016 and did it through perception and not through actual work on the ground. When you look at some of the numbers coming in, did he do better with Latinos than he did in 2016? Actually not in Nevada, if you look at the numbers. So it's actually this you think about under 50, right? He killed it with under 50 in 2016. But in some states, they didn't set up operations until, I was just told, I haven't verified this, but I was told by somebody who was very reputable, who ran Michigan in 2016, said that they didn't set up an office until 2.5 weeks ago. So having this big organizing approach to the presidency, which was the model this time around, and putting people out there that are emblematic of the DSA woke crowd to overcorrect for 2016 may have actually lost him the working class that he was possibly going to lose, the white working class, to Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton.
Define the DSA woke crowd.
Well, it's not all of DSA. I mean, I'm a member of DSA, but there's a vocal portion of DSA that's also on the internet vocal. And I'm not saying that like I don't think Boskar's like this. I don't think that Maria Svart's like this. I think there's a vocal group that are thinking not in terms of intersectionality, like true intersectionality, and basing things off of an economic message, but are really thinking, we have to overcorrect for the history and the legacy of DSA being overly white. Now, that, of course, has to happen through an intersectional approach, but it doesn't mean that you abandon the economic principles that you ran on and you drown that out. It's about adding to the coalition, not erasing part of the group that builds your coalition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm not active in the electoral working group, so you probably know more about it than I do.
I do, actually, unfortunately. But personally.
I mean, my experience of folks in DSA has, especially the caucus that I'm in, Emerge, which is a communist caucus out of New York City. They're very cool. We're affiliated with the National Commie Caucus, which has been doing some good tweets. But the thing we've been saying is that we need to be building from the ground up these kinds of working class institutions that could give institutional power for an insurgent candidate like Sanders, but also, even more importantly, bring back organized labor, bring back unions in places where we don't have them. Because if we have an organized working class that's capable of things like a general strike, which is, a pie in the sky goal, but something we should be working towards, we can exert pressure from the outside to make the government do what we want them to do.
And Sarah Nelson was so great at that, right? She understood power and she understood the utility of the flight attendants workers. But the majority of unions right now, I mean, we love the idea of unions, but they've been under attack, obviously, for the last 35 years. They're extremely weakened. And frankly, a lot of them are rank and file, and they're not going to be playing ball with DSA anytime soon. So these are the kinds of conversations we have to have about how power works and how the left, which is pro-labor, messages to these unions, because there's no reason why Bernie Sanders shouldn't have had the culinary workers on his side after 4 years.
Well,
there's real work that could be done.
Right now, unions are just fighting for their very existence.
Exactly.
And we saw this in New York, where a lot of unions endorsed Cuomo over Cynthia Nixon. They have to make... And they made a rational choice, really. Like, if a candidate like Bernie wins and they didn't endorse him, he's not going to punish them. But Cuomo is a vindictive asshole, and he will. And until unions are strong enough, and I think that also involves becoming more democratic, they're going to keep having to make these bad compromises.
And, one thing about unions, too, is they reflect their membership a lot. And in some of these unions, like the building trades, for example, or like police unions, you have a very conservative, and it's kind of an I got mine membership in some of these. And I really appreciate that the DSA has been trying to improve the membership of some of these. And I think that speaks to a broader thing coming out of tonight is, very bad night for Bernie. I don't want to say the primary is over. I know there's kind of a lot of doomsaying, but hey, Biden still has to make it through that debate. There's a chance, Biden was carried by earned media, live by earned media, die by earned media. But assuming that, if Bernie loses the primary, I think you kind of have to think about this as, a moment where, this was never going to happen overnight. And I bring up, the Goldwater to Reagan thing. Bernie's runs in 2016. Maybe we get President AOC in 2032, 16 years later. And I think the focus needs to be not on, it's like, it can't all be about the presidency. I think Obama showed that, where just like electing someone who you think is a good president isn't going to change everything.
Right.
It's all about the institutions you build. And I think the splits in these primary returns tonight show you there's huge potential in engaging in electoral politics where voters under 44 went for Sanders. And just, you have to build the institutions to support those voters over time and get them to keep coming out and turn more of them out. And that's how you kind of build a movement.
And the material reality is this, is that, obviously you have a certain bias, obviously, to the state level stuff. But the reality is, dollar for dollar, right? It's the best value you can get. And I will say this, that like in terms of like woman or manpower, perspective, the more you put in, the more you get out of those type of things. And the reality is this also in terms of politics. I mean, I don't know if it's as obvious to people who are younger, but it's certainly obvious to me, is that when you are younger, you have more time and you have more energy and more time to do these things. And so you have an automatic advantage. If you are 25 or you are 30 out there, and statistically speaking, the chances are that you are without child. And your ability to go in and basically run the table just by sheer sort of like amount of energy you have, you have an advantage that exists, prior to the first dollar being spent. Is just that like you have more sort of like you have other resources that are not available. And so the idea of like folks taking over their party, their local party, the apparatus and shaping things on the ground, and therefore, sort of like having the ability to influence things on a more local level is there for people. And, that is, I think that is like, again, a great place to sort of focus on. Joe Biden has already sort of like, made the case that he would be a caretaker administration. I think like, my sense is too, and this was my sense certainly in 2016, was that the left is simply not strong enough to, and I think it was perhaps even in this instance, not strong enough to win a fight like this with the odds stacked against them in this way.
Yeah.
Like, look, Bernie Sanders, if he was 50 and had not had a heart attack,
right?
Like, I gotta tell you, that's probably worth like a considerable amount of votes. Like, this is not, if there was, Joe Biden won because he was the vice president, and people are looking like who's got the best chance of winning, and he was associated with Obama. But if Bernie Sanders was 50. We could be looking at something very differently. Like, it's going to be interpreted as an ideological choice here because, I'm going to go over to MSNBC tonight and there's going to be people telling us like they wanted a moderate, they wanted stability. No, they just wanted to who was going to win. We can see that from the polling. Only 30% of the people were voting based upon what their ideology was. 65% were voting who they thought was going to win. And voters are not, even the people who watch us, like are the, represent like the 0.01% of people who have, savvy and know, and we don't know.
Yeah.
And so like the idea that like half a dozen people that they've seen on TV come out and say, Joe Biden's the guy who's going to win. All right, I believe you. I mean, it would be irrational not to. If 70% of the people are going to go by electability, and 80% of the other candidates in the race are saying, I give up, he's the one who can win. That's it. It's just, there's no like, but we're looking at numbers where 55%, 60%, 52% say, I want single payer. I'm willing to give them my private health insurance. We have 30% who are voting on ideology. I mean, people have to keep this in mind. It's just that we need to be able to build sort of the institutional strength and just the broader strength. And it's also a question of like, some demographics. We need like the younger people to get a little bit older.
What concerns me about just the 2018 to 2020 numbers, and it's a little early to tell, but just what we're talking about, the energy, is there was this energy in 2018 that clearly showed up, and it's not being actualized the same way. I mean, a vote is a vote, but the organizing on the ground is not happening at the same levels. And partly it's because the presidential and the local groups, I mean, all these local groups popped up after 2016. Indivisible, Our Revolution, Justice Democrats.
Future Now.
I have to throw that out there. But these organizations popped up, and some had electoral wins. Some had Justice Democrats had like one electoral win, or maybe I think they endorsed Rashida and Ilhan too. But very notable electoral wins, but the rest weren't. And that's okay because the Democrats lost 1,200 seats in 10 years, so nobody can criticize. But the energy and the political strategy of these groups, a lot of them, not all of them, have shifted rather rapidly into surrendering. And I mean, Justice Democrats not endorsing until 2 days before. Same thing with WFP, which is not a new organization, it's different. I think we have to kind of assess, how do we do the long game? And a lot of the folks that started the organizations were new to politics, some weren't, like yourself. Our Revolution has had its successes and weaknesses, but we have to assess what didn't work, because it's only been 4 years for many of these groups and less. And how do we make sure that these organizations grow and build and become better, and that people don't get exhausted? Because I think a lot of people are really tired of losing the last 4 years. There were great wins, but there were a lot of losses.
Yeah,
well, welcome to being on the left.
Well, I think also to keep in mind is that the reason the presidential election, the primary, sucked a lot of that energy out, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders was hoovering up a lot of money. That money now, if this is the end of the race. Is going to start to get dispersed to other places.
Matriarch organization.
And I mean, honestly, I mean, that's I think we're going to start to see that ramp up again. Yeah. And, the fact is that what we saw in 2018 was, I think to a large extent, pure negative partisanship. And I think this outcome is also a reflection of that. When 70% of the electorate says, I'm not voting based upon whether I agree with the person. I'm just voting based upon whether I think this person can beat Trump. That's negative partisanship.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's all that is. It's I don't even issue set, and it's predictable. I was saying today on the show, in 2016, when I was having arguments with people, Donald Trump is going to win. And then we're going to get I think Jimmy Dore wanted Elizabeth Warren, if you can believe this, back in 2016.
God.
But the idea was we're gonna get a leftist candidate. And I was like, well, my experience has been following Reagan and following Bush is just get me out of here, and that's it. And that is the, broadly speaking, people from the center to the left. Obviously, the further left you get, the more ideological people get in terms of what earns their vote. But broadly speaking, many of those people are just I want to not have to pay attention to politics.
Yeah, I think Biden is ultimately capitalizing on a lot of that. I think it's widely, I think rightfully kind of derided as I can go back to brunch vote,
And I mean,
how'd that work out with John Kerry and Hillary Clinton?
I mean, I think I don't think Clinton represented that, because I think there was a sense of you're coming off of Obama's, and I think that was a different dynamic. Kerry, to a certain extent, was we want somebody who's going to win, and I don't feel like the sense was you didn't have that. It wasn't
a return to normalcy.
No, he wasn't pushing a return to normalcy, because there was nothing normal. You were still in the wake of 9/11, and it was still very much. It was
he actually, and I would say the 2004 and 2012 campaigns were actually a lot more class warfare-y than we give him credit for. And I think the 2012 presidential election, that was class warfare, and I think. You can win on class warfare. I mean, I think Democrats are terrified of it, but you can win on it. I mean, Mitt Romney was this rich asshole who's going to take your job and rub your face in the dirt.
But recall that the first shots in that war, and I think what set the tone for that was Newt Gingrich.
Yeah.
It's Gingrich who put out that video about Bain.
Oh, yeah.
And he is the one who, I think, like, there was a certain amount of like coasting off of that Obama did. You also have to remember that everybody was very attuned to that message because of Occupy. You're only, whatever.
Yeah,
You're in the, you're 6 months out, essentially.
I just look at, a lot of my job is looking at political districts and electoral history. And I see all these districts, especially like the Midwest, where the only Democrat who's won them in the past decade was Obama in 2012. And I look at the demographics there and I'm just like, class warfare works.
Right.
That's all I can, that's all.
Right.
And I guess, the thing about Bernie and, where do we go from here? I mean, I will say that, there was one politician in my life who captured my imagination the way that Bernie's captured so many people's, and that was Paul Wellstone.
I knew you were going to say.
and like, I mean, when he died, it was one of the worst days of my life. And I think about him all the time and what, the lessons I learned from him. And I think the thing that always stuck with me was that, you get into politics to improve people's lives. And I think, where do you go from here? Bernie, this is his last time running for president. If this is his last time running for president, if he loses to Biden, he's not coming back in 2020. It's time for a new generation to take over. And just, I think that principle that I took from, I don't have Paul Wellstone to support anymore, but I took that principle away from him. And I think people, they need to kind of figure out what that Bernie said to you. If you support Bernie and he's not the nominee, what that he said to you really resonated with you. How do you take that forward?
Right. I think that's a good point. And I think, the reality is that the value of a center left administration is that you begin to have an argument that makes it clear, like where everybody stands, and people have to account. And, what could be more clarifying than Joe Biden vetoing Medicare for all passed by both houses? Now, it's very hard to imagine that, but I think, I'm just using that as, well, because he said it today or yesterday, but because it's also like a good example of like, this is, in my mind, this is how the left gets stronger, where the argument is a little bit more clear as to what's going on.
So you think back to 2004, Kerry was swift-boated. All these organizations popped up through billionaires, frankly. The Democracy Alliance organizations, for those who don't know, there was like this slew of organizations to redefine foreign policy, to redefine, to register voters, to reach out to Latinos, to reach out to whatever demographics. I can't remember all of them. There were a bunch of them, all funded by like a group of left-leaning, not philanthropic because they weren't tax breaks, but left-leaning liberals out there that were billionaires for the most part, families. And many of these organizations don't exist anymore. Some do, but like we would never say, oh, they're left organizations. But they were like 8 years ago. We would say that.
Right.
And part of that has to do with the business model of it, like the corporate business model of it, being reliant on big donors rather than small donors. Because believe it or not, small donors are actually kind of a new thing. In 2016, like no presidential candidate has been able to do that before, and that alone, I think,
Howard
is worth
Dean
it all.
was sort of like the first version of that, but yes,
but nothing like this. Not fully
no.
funded by small dollar donations, no corporate money. So we're going to have an update in a second. With that being said, the left was alive in 2004, and then we won the House back in 2006, and then of course 2008 we got Barack Obama. And there was this runway where millennials were, I was in college, I'm an older millennial. So it wasn't like the generation today where you have millennials and those younger and parts of Gen X who are very, very, very progressive. It was like a small contingent of young voters were able to influence Barack Obama's election. And that's only going to get better for us. So if we have better organizations that aren't reliant on corporate donors and billionaires, and we have the millennial generation, parts of Gen X, and possibly all of it eventually, and Zoomers who are turning out and shaping these organizations, I think we're going to have more success. We won the House in 2006 after these organizations got on the ground.
And but the reality about those organizations, as far as I can tell, is that they were non-ideological.
Yeah.
But I think that there's and they were, I think like largely, I think like women in their 40s and 50s, right? I mean, you'd have a sense of this too in terms of like the.
Well, Truman Project, like.
I mean, there's a whole constellation of groups out there. Future.org. And there's a variety. I mean, I would say, middle-aged women are particularly kind of, Trump is particularly abhorrent to them, and I think they have really been the backbone to a lot of the movement. But I mean, I think that just like you've had this broad array, like a lot of resistance groups have popped up since then, and I think now we're kind of, say Biden wins, then you go from the resistance to Charles de Gaulle, and like kind of how do you do that? How do you transition to being in power? And I think. And I think that's the question.
It's a big challenge because you don't have Donald Trump there, and,
right. And you don't have a boogeyman. And so again, I think that's why it comes back to you need to focus on a political program that improves people's lives. And I mean, I think that I know that Biden, he's probably going to hire a lot of former Obama people. My hope is that they are chastened by what happened in 2008.
I'll tell you, I want to hold this thought because all I can think about is Brian Fallon, frankly, and that organization that he's got going.
He's basically had to make up for the fact that
Yeah.
he screwed up on judges, and he's devoting his life
he
to making
seems
up
to be
for
right,
it.
right, and that's exactly the type of person I want.
I want all those Obama
the people who are just like,
Yeah.
my whole career is trying to make up for the mess that I did.
I know it's like we bailed out the banks and not the homeowners. How do we not repeat that?
Exactly. All right, hold on for 1 second. Let's take a call here. Well, it's not a call. It is a call, but he's calling on the guest line. Virgil, what's your prediction for tonight? Oh, hold on. Virgil, hold on for a second. Matt has gone to the bathroom and you're not lifting you up. Will you pop up the phone, please? There. That was poor timing on my part. Virgil, you there? Phone.
Yeah, you want me to?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you're there.
Yeah, you want me to hang up?
No.
What's the issue?
What's your prediction for tonight?
Is there a bathroom issue? I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
No, that's why we didn't have any sound. Because
oh, okay, all right.
Our board.
Let me just want to retweet this video here so that people can go on and look at that video. Excellent, great. There it is. Hi, good evening, Sam. Obviously, watching the results come in, and obviously not for Bernie Sanders. He's underperforming by about 10 points in the state of Michigan, which was the state that kept his campaign alive in 2016. And I know a lot of people tonight, throughout the day, had a lot of hope that the polls were wrong like they were in 2016. And a lot of people operate under the knowledge that Michigan is a state that produces, at times, some very unexpected results. In fact, in 2016, it produced two very bigly unexpected results, didn't it? Both of which against Hillary Clinton. This time around, Bernie did outperform the polls insofar as some polls showed him down as much as 25, 30 points. But it's going to be very hard for the campaign to spin this as anything other than a loss, combined with, frankly, a catastrophic loss in Mississippi, loss in Missouri, and an open question as to how he's going to do out in the West Coast in Washington, where the networks will probably not call that race tonight. It probably won't be called for a few days because Washington has an all-male primary. So the big problem for Sanders right now is it's not just a delegate accumulation race. He has to blunt Joe Biden's momentum, and he needs some narrative that will help him do that. And something like, I don't know, a win in Michigan is exactly what would have done that. Maybe a close loss in Michigan would have helped him do that. But right now it looks like there's not going to be any positive news coming out of tonight, and especially you've got people like Jim Clyburn and Thomas Friedman openly musing about exactly how Sanders will lead the race. And you already see, you've seen since Super Tuesday recriminations from people who, to Sanders supporters or pose as leftists, who are, I would say, the people with the least buy-in with the Sanders campaign, but you might see the faith of people shaken after tonight because there are so few positive indications. And Sanders has been caught in a catch-22 right now because he needs, to the degree that Joe Biden currently leads the national polls with like 52, 55%. He's got a majority there. Sanders' path to nomination goes through peeling off some of Biden's support.
Right.
And the strongest way he could do that is to make the argument that, look, I know you like Joe Biden. He's a nice guy. He's my friend. He's my friend Joe, but he's going to lose to Donald Trump. He's the worst nominee we could have for X, Y, and Z reason. That's probably the most direct argument that Sanders could make, and it goes right at, in Karl Rove style, it goes right at the source of Biden's strength. Really, his only strength in this race is that there is a massive perception that he is the safe option.
Right.
And what's aggravating here is it's only been a two-person race for a week.
Right.
There's been very little opportunity to actually evaluate that premise. Everyone is just kind of going along with it. Nobody's really given it a second thought.
Well, all right. The other candidates in the race did, right? I mean, that's the problem. This is until you started having this cascade of endorsements, people were not sold on that idea. Right. It was just that there was all these people who basically said to signify. I mean, that's why, I don't know, in my mind, Bernie Sanders can sit there and say he's not electable all day, but that's no more compelling than Biden saying Sanders is not electable.
Except it took them until March to endorse him, which shows that he clearly wasn't the front runner. They didn't believe in him. Indeed,
but we're in mid-March and they haven't endorsed Sanders. That's why I think the debate is really the only thing where it's it's really the last. It seems to me, and I don't even know if it's going to be the last chance or if we're already at the last chance. Yeah. It's the last chance for people to see, and I don't even think that if I'm Sanders, depending on what happens, with Washington State, but I don't know if I go in there with my job to be anything other than to speak to people and try and push an agenda and let Joe Biden stand or fall on his own, with questions from the audience and just be like,
I would take
no more audience.
It's town hall with no audience.
Well, wait a second. How's that going to happen? Oh, so it's going to be questions from a moderator.
Twitter.
Well, I mean, who knows? But the point being is there's just not I think the only way to make that argument now is basically to see if Joe can do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how Sanders can walk out of there, particularly if he loses Washington, go to the debate and do anything other than just be I'm having my conversation with the American public. Joe can have his. If his doesn't go well, then I'm still here. But if he, I just think that's the dynamic now.
Virgil, do you think that you've been on the ground a lot? Just a real quick question. Do you think that Bernie's going to bring up the argument he made in 2016, which is every single primary voter should have a stake in this primary and we should carry it out until the convention?
I can't tell you what Bernie Sanders is thinking. I think that the mood from Brooklyn is going to be, we're going to keep fighting this out, and we intend to go to all 50 states. And I imagine that they will have the money and the volunteers to do that. I want to give you, I want to address what you said, Sam, but first let me preface this by saying that here's the only positive kind of piece of information from tonight. 1 in 3 Michigan voters decided in the last few days, and same deal in Missouri. And Sanders lost those voters. He lost in those voters, the late deciders in Michigan, by about 20 points, whereas he was even for the other 2/3 of voters who had decided before Super Tuesday or so, thereabouts. It's an indication that there's still, even if Biden is cruising right now in the top line national numbers. He's ahead by anywhere from 10 to 15 points nationally. That most people, I mean, there's still a substantial number of people who have not decided, who are not paying attention to the race.
Right.
And the priority for Sanders and the opportunity that he has is to grab these people as they start to pay attention. And it's obvious he wasn't able to accomplish that in Michigan, but there is a debate coming up. And as well, you noted that in the past, when Joe Biden was attacked, he went down. When people met Joe Biden in Iowa and New Hampshire, they said they didn't want this. And there is yet Joe Biden is nevertheless a compromise candidate, but there's still a premise to Joe Biden being the compromise candidate, being the consensus nominee, which is that he is electable, that he would be a steady hand on the wheel. And I'm sorry, the more you hear from Joe Biden, I mean, just today there was, of course, that gap where he's screaming at that gun guy in the factory. I think the more you see from Joe Biden, the more erratic he appears. So, frankly, my strategic recommendation would be to go negative against Joe Biden. Relentlessly. You have to make this argument explicitly. I realize that they can both, lay out different agendas for the country, whatever, but I'm sorry, at this point, most of the media and the Democratic Party want the race to be over.
Right.
And as well, I don't know if you saw MSNBC earlier today, and this is the completion of what I was saying earlier, but this is the catch-22. I don't know if you saw MSNBC earlier today, but there was very little about the primary. These are a big, important primaries happening today. Until about an hour before the polls closing, it was, I would say, 80-90% content about the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic, and they aired in full the press conference with Mike Pence, all that shit. I'm saying that Bernie Sanders runs the risk of this primary falling off the front page, meaning that if he's gonna make this argument that
he's got to create a scene. He's got to create a scene.
He's got to make it. He's got to make
this.
He can't make this obliquely.
He just doesn't.
Nomi's argument is that he'll be howling at the moon, essentially.
Yeah. Last time he had the leverage. He had, he's going into the convention very clearly up until the convention, up until California, arguably. This time you have Trump in the White House, keeping children in cages at the border. And you have, the delegate count, sure, is close, but I think people are exhausted. And I think
compulsion to get this over, I think, is
that's right.
huge. I mean, let me put it this way. When Joe Biden said, when O'Donnell in that interview asked him about COVID-19, which is what we say, because you managed to get us demonetized for this whole show. We had not even mentioned it. I'm joking.
Instead of Corona.
But right.
One's better.
Right. And when we say Corona, we're talking beer. That's just for the transcript.
I'm learning so much from you for my show.
But when Joe Biden said, I just wish he would, my plan would be just to shut up. And it's like, wait, what? Like the way you're expressing leadership is just like, we just need to make things a little bit quieter. And I just thought, oh my God, only in this environment could the contender to be the president in a crisis say, I'm just going to hang back. Really?
But that's emblematic of this Democratic Party in every way and form.
And of this moment, too, I think. And by the party, we're talking about, broadly, the electorate, right? People are just please, let's just have this end.
Brunch.
And yeah, exactly. It is that attitude. And
can I bring up?
Go ahead.
Could I just bring up 2 points there? Nomiki, as you mentioned, you are right. That is the attitude. That is, I would honestly call that apathy at this point. I would call this a dereliction of duty to say whatever. That guy seems fine. Nomi, you brought up, of course, children in cages. That was a policy that emerged in the Obama-Biden administration.
Yes.
And you see from the fact that Bernie Sanders at this stage continues to win Latino voters by 2-1 margin, that this is a huge vulnerability if Biden is on the ticket, and he's going to rely on big turnout from Latino voters in order to get over the top against Trump. And the other point I want to make is, at the end of tonight, a majority of the country will not have voted. A majority of delegates will not have been allocated. And it's a fair argument for Bernie Sanders to make, to say, once these voters have a chance to compare our records, once we're on the stage together debating, that there is no reason not to think that I will not be, I'm sorry, I'm using way too many negatives in this fucking sentence, that it is quite possible that I will be winning the next 50% of races by a bigger margin than Joe Biden has been winning the last 50% of races.
That is an argument. That is the path. But like, what's weird about the last 9 days, 10 days, whatever it is that every day the narrative has gotten just more and more against Bernie in a way that wasn't like 2006. 2016 was just steady. It has been stark every day, just a shift, like to the point where I'm a forever optimist, and I'm like, all right, guys, it's time. It's time for us to see that if we want to preserve Bernie Sanders' legacy beyond just like the Bernie movement, we have to understand that he has to rise to the occasion. I mean, he might go to the debate. Sure, that's in 5 days, and there's a lot of time between now and 5 days. But to make the argument that he goes to the debate because he still has a path, and then we should take it, all the way essentially to the convention, is going to be really tough for him. And I think that he'll probably feel the pressure.
Well, I mean, let's not make it. Let's just.
And Obama could endorse. I'm sorry. Obama could endorse.
Let's just step back and not look about it in terms of like the like Bernie the individual. But the question is like, do you deplete all of your risk depleting all of your resources
right.
for this, what is essentially a Hail Mary? And really what it involves is assessing, like, what are the chances of winning versus what are the costs associated with making the movement a pariah within the context of the party. And
spot on.
It's a hard assessment to make, and like and I mean I think it's clear where I land on this, which is like, for me, stay in the debate, make the debate about like a civil discourse. Just give Joe Biden one opportunity to sink himself, and if he doesn't, you've at least basically gone off the stage with like giving people a good taste in their mouths about this agenda. Because look, like I keep saying, 60% of the people walking out of these booths, the last 17 primaries have said, I want to get rid of my private insurance for government, for a single payer insurance plan. Only 30% say I'm going in there and voting based upon whose ideas I agree with. And it's just like,
and I think that's because which is the belief that, well, look, this guy, he's not actually selling me anything I want to buy. He's not actually with me on any policies that matter to me. I just think he seems safe. And
well, that he's going to win.
An argument that can be.
I know the argument is he's going to win, and here's the problem. It's like you have Bernie trying to argue that Joe Biden is going to win against the other 10 people who were in the race, or 7 or 5 or 6 or whatever. And maybe Barack Obama, you know what I mean? And all these other people. And look, like I say, my theory of the case is that Bernie has a much better chance of winning than Joe Biden. I would put a bet on that. But I have a certain amount of motivated reasoning, and it's like, if I'm going to defer to just who are the, the sort of like the trust agents, it's like, he needs another half a dozen people to come out that are going to say, Bernie can win. And I don't know who those people are in our society.
Well, again, I want to note this. Again, it's only been 7 days that we have been in this period of the race. And in that 7 days, we have seen multiple instances of Joe Biden's cognitive decline. His campaign has almost explicitly said, our strategy is to hide him from the public. Sorry, that's not going to fly in the general election. And if Joe Biden wants to claim that he'd be the better nominee, that, you know, he's got the stamina to go up against Donald Trump, then he should have the stamina to go up against Bernie Sanders, to parry attacks from Bernie Sanders that, frankly, will be a lot gentler than the billion-dollar attacks that will come from Trump and the Republican Party and the billionaires that support it.
The only thing I would also add to that to that challenge is that in 2 weeks, these guys are not going to be making the type of public appearances that we even saw this week.
That's true.
They're just not going to be. And they're going to have a perfectly good excuse not to do it. I don't want to endanger my supporters.
Sure.
And so there's not going to be, you're not going to get things like you saw today with Joe Biden talking to that guy.
Yeah.
You're just going to have very controlled environments. There's going to be no way for anybody to make an issue of that. And the press is not going to show up when Bernie Sanders has a presser, you know, in Washington or Burlington or, you know, in New York, you know, in Albany, wherever it is. They're just not going to, you know, like, I think all of these things, I don't know. There's no circumstance in my mind where I wouldn't show up at that debate. And I would, you know, I think we still get to see the numbers in terms of like how aggressive I would be in that debate. But there have been gains that have been made and they can be lost, I think. On some level, I think they can be lost. And in the context of primaries.
Can I ask a question just based on I'm sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
No, I was about to change the subject. So if you're on topic, go ahead.
Sort of on topic, but it might not be. Numbers wise, if say we stay at this rate, you know, more or less with the polls, what they're saying, given 5 or 6%, I don't know where we're going to end up with other states. What would Bernie need to perform at in the next few states on the next, you know, Super Tuesday, whatever they're calling
Well,
it?
yeah, I mean, so
in the next half,
Yeah.
right. Back of the envelope tells me 58-ish. It was about 53 after Super Tuesday, but that is Super Tuesday. The delegates of Super Tuesday have not all been allocated yet either. There's
a lot of California
about 100
ones are still out.
outstanding. So, I mean, I'm going to say back of the envelope 57, 58.
Hey, Virgil, maybe you can weigh in on this for a second. Do you think that the social democratic left would be more likely to win working class demands if we were better at forming a class cross coalition with wealthier liberals?
I don't know. I can't answer that question because I think that the social democratic left is in a disarray because right now the organizing principle of the social democratic left and the socialist left right now is the Bernie Sanders campaign. And obviously the Sanders campaign has in recent weeks onboarded a number of self-ID progressives or self-ID liberals. I don't know what you want to call that coalition, but we do know right now that what the current Sanders coalition is, which is about 40% of the electorate, is not enough to win the race. But I do believe there is still an opportunity for Sanders to go after voting blocs that voted for him in big margins, such as white, non-college educated voters in 2016. But that route goes through reducing Biden's favorability ratings and making the argument that he is a fatally flawed candidate.
I just worry at like the prospect of giving too much influence over a policy platform to people whose class interests do not align with those of the working class. I think they're welcome to come along. I think that is great, but I don't think that they should ever be calling the shots because we've seen that fail over and over again.
Calling the shots, though, is different. Like, it's like when Bernie writes a bill with Rand Paul. You know what I mean? Co-sponsors a bill with Rand Paul. Rand Paul's not calling the shots, but he has leverage there at the table.
I just feel like anytime you give a class leverage at the table that is not the working class, you have bad results for the working class. I'm sorry if I sound facile. I'm just trying to break it down to be understood by
James,
as well as possible.
James, I don't think that right now the greatest threat to Bernie is that he's ceding too much control over his coalition. I think he's very much so in the driver's seat. I do want to address this point that Sam and Nomi made earlier about the opportunity cost for Sanders supporters if he were to continue with the campaign in a fact that I believe is the only strategically sound and frankly appropriate way to continue the campaign, the only possible path to the nomination, which means going negative against Joe Biden as they have started to do. I would say that soft walking Joe Biden right now, that's not going to win you any plaudits from the people who you've been running against this entire race, for the people that your supporters do not like, because the central premise of your campaign is we're going to take power away from the ultra wealthy in this country and from the people who serve the ultra wealthy, which includes the consultant class that makes up the power brokers in the Democratic Party.
But it also makes up the power brokers in our allies that we are potentially trying to reach out to. And I think this is where the frustration lies, is that it's not that we're ceding class. It's that sometimes it's masked in this like wokishness. And I think that like...
What do you mean by wokishness?
I mean, okay, where's Michael Brooks when I need him? No, but I mean, there's like bringing folks on who say, okay, we need to focus on XYZ demographics, and then it becomes like a video on the campaign. Like, I'm not going to say which videos came out today on the campaign, but literally the only message that should have been out there today should have been about working class labor issues, because it's intersectional. It speaks to black working class voters in Detroit. It speaks to white working class voters in Detroit. It speaks to women, and it really should have been framed from that lens. Instead, I saw like a couple of videos that were really out there, and they were like Warren-esque.
Like,
and
what were they saying?
I don't want to. Listen, I don't want to criticize.
But isn't
people.
I'm trying to understand what you mean by.
I don't want to put myself in this position because it's not that I'm against these issues. It's that you have to focus on the issues that matter in the electorate when you're trying to win that electorate.
Can I come in? I actually think, I think Virgil has a point here about what is the path forward, and I think that pointing out Biden's weaknesses, I think has to be part of that. I think Bernie lost the 2016 primary when he said he wouldn't talk about Hillary Clinton's emails. Guess what their general election was decided on? Her emails.
Right.
But I also want to say, it can't just be that. And I think that, and even if and I know also he has an affinity for Joe Biden, that he might not be comfortable going negative too hard. But I want to say there's a place for Bernie Sanders here. And I think we're ignoring the big thing right now, which is coronavirus. And we have a pandemic that's about to hit our country that is going to overwhelmingly, it's going to affect everyone, but the brunt of it is going to be borne by, a lot of the most at-risk people. And I think in a pandemic, you come to realize that, we're only as strong as the weakest members of our own society. And Bernie has a message out there that says, we're in the middle of this. I'm the only one in this race with a platform to make sure that the guy making your burrito at Chipotle and driving your bus makes you have health care so that they're comfortable not going into work if they're sick, and that they'll actually get sick leave. I think he has a message that needs to be heard, even if even if he loses Washington. Even if, and like Virgil says, more than half the delegates are still out, there's still, it's not, a 20-point game with 2 minutes left. There's still a path here. He's down at halftime pretty bad, and it's pretty tough to come back. But, but he still has a message here. And I think people, in a moment like this where we're facing kind of the society-wide threat, I think his voice is a valuable one to have.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to after this and weigh in on that discussion. Right now, the question isn't that Bernie's message is going to change in order to get new allies. That's not the question right now. The message is the message, and the message is going to be the same because it's a good message. It's a message that he's had his entire life for the past 40 years.
That's not the campaign's
What
message.
matters right now is peeling off 1/3 of Biden support among white, non-college educated voters.
Exactly.
Peeling off 1/3 of Biden's support among white, college educated voters. Peeling off 1/4 of Joe Biden's support among African American voters. These are all groups that give Bernie Sanders high ratings. Some of these groups voted for him in 2016. He has the opportunity to do that. There's no reason to throw the game at halftime.
Well, I mean,
How's he gonna?
I mean, I guess and I think Virgil's answered how he would do that is to go negative on Biden. And I guess from my perspective, the difficulty here is that we do know that 70% of the people are walking in there, and they're voting on electability, right? And presumably, I would imagine the 30% that are voting on their issues are probably, and I haven't seen the data, but my instinct is to think that the majority of those people are voting for Bernie because I can't tell you what Joe Biden stands for. It's hard for me to imagine that there are people out there who are just like, I'm so into Joe Biden's plan. But the question then becomes like, how do you compete? How do you compete on that argument of electability without it backfiring on you in this instance? Like, how does, like, what is it? I mean, Bernie Sanders going out there and saying this guy's too old to be president is not going to work because he's older.
And that's the risk there, right?
And the risk is like you just start to build your own negatives.
That's right. And
that bleeds into the entire issue set that you stand for. What is it that is going to say from an electability standpoint? Like, because I can articulate it, but and I think like maybe Social Security is there, but it's hard enough to make the argument that Joe wants to cut Social Security in terms of this media environment, particularly with this onslaught of coronavirus. Because I mean, like even here,
that's right.
Like the crawl on MSNBC, and I bet it's the same thing on CNN, is testing setback coronavirus, and cases rise to over 900. I mean, this is a material threat to people. You need to not just make the case that Joe Biden wanted to cut Social Security, which is the absolute truth. We have video. I mean, but that then Donald Trump is going to weaponize it. And this has been basically my project. And people respond to me like, well, people aren't going to believe Donald Trump over Joe Biden. Like, and it's like, well, no, they're going to suppress the vote. Like, we're so far down the thing that like this, we need to have a podcast to describe it. Like, I don't know how Bernie manages to communicate that. That's the only thing that I'm like balancing. That's why I think to myself, like, if you get to that debate, it is really then like the pressure is you make the pressure on Biden and sink or swim.
It is about electability.
And
it's just what the polls are saying.
Also, one thing to keep in mind is a few weeks ago, it would be we would have been insane to think that we'd be sitting here right now talking about the race being down to Bernie and Biden. We would have thought it'd be Bernie and maybe Buttigieg or Warren or Klobuchar or something if it were down to two. And so, if there's one thing we've seen is that, again, Joe Biden didn't rise to become the front runner for the nomination based on the strength of like a durable campaign that he built. He was able to get here based on a wave of positive earned media. And if you live by positive earned media, you can die by positive earned media. I know that there is rightfully a lot of cynicism about whether you can get earned media to go in Bernie's favor. But I feel like him dropping out now, I think I want to think that, he can still run a race that he wants to run and not regret it. But I think he would regret dropping out now when so much has changed over the past few weeks so quickly.
I just think that at the very least, you have to stay in until the debate. Yeah,
At the
very least, you have to stay into the debate because it is it seems to me to be eminently justifiable. The Democratic Party deserves to see the two people that they're going to choose from and go on that stage. And, as to the strategy of that debate, I need to see what happens over the next 4 or 5 days. But it seems to me that you need to go to that debate. And then, I think like
So what's Bernie's message? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, he's going to come up against the media tomorrow morning, saying, all right, the voters have spoken. You're doing worse than you did last time around, and you went to the convention last time around, and you already were facing this opposition.
We have seen how quickly this race has turned.
Exactly.
And within 10 days, everything is topsy-turvy. We have seen how important debates have been to the American public. Michael Bloomberg was considered a force 3 weeks ago, and now he's an afterthought. People can't remember he's there.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party deserves, and I would not be just doing a disservice to my supporters, I would be doing a disservice to the entire party. 70% of the party wants to know who's the most electable. We need to give them an opportunity to make a stark choice, a similar choice, an analogous choice that they will make in November. And we can only do that with both candidates on the stage. And we owe the American public that.
And half of the Democratic Party has not voted yet in this election. And, furthermore, when you look at the delegate, we can even say the delegate count is extremely close still.
Frankly, I would be doing a disservice to Joe Biden.
Right.
And I would imagine that Joe feels the same way. He wants the opportunity to have a debate, a one-on-one debate, so that he is prepared for dealing with a television star.
And challenging
in fact, Joe called me last night and said, stay in the race.
That is what he needs to do. That is it.
Also, I also want to point out that we still haven't gotten a single vote in from Idaho or Washington, two states where
if he wins Washington or Idaho,
or
it's
North
just
Dakota,
or North Dakota,
if he wins anywhere, it's a slam dunk. You got to stay in.
There are a few
People
votes in
been
North Dakota, though, but
tweeting
not much.
updates at me from Idaho of very long lines at polling stations where students are trying to vote.
I heard in North Dakota, there was only like one station.
14,
North Dakota.
There are 14 places to vote in all of North Dakota for Democrats.
Yeah, apparently only one in Grand Forks and Fargo, which are the two main, especially college towns in North Dakota.
Wow, that's convenient.
And I also want to note this, that, and again, I'm sure you've talked about it. I'm sure you've been observing it. Independent voters, Bernie Sanders cleans up by an over 2-to-1 margin. Among Latino voters, 2-to-1 margin across the nation. Among voters under 29, he has under 30. He has not lost that demographic in a single race. Even states like South Carolina or North Carolina, where he lost overall by big margins. Under 45 voters, he is still leading nationwide. And yes, the problem is that demographic, for a variety of reasons, is not coming out to vote in the same numbers that senior citizens come out to vote. But they are absolutely crucial to the Democratic Party's chances in November. Just as well, I know that, Sam, you're intimating that maybe Bernie Sanders should kind of play ball a little bit here, and that will better for the Democratic ticket. Biden's obviously favored.
You're breaking up a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me right now?
Now is better.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'll stand right here.
Okay, that's perfect.
Now, I know you're intimating earlier that maybe, Bernie Sanders should be a little softer, maybe not as negative as I am urging Bernie Sanders to go negative in order to maintain his standing in the Democratic Party for the sake of his supporters and his movement, but also to make the not soften Biden too much up. Well, hang on. I would say that the opposite is true. I would say as well that there is a compelling interest among Democratic Party stakeholders, among Biden supporters, to not force Bernie Sanders out of the race, or else they risk pissing off these demographics that they will rely on.
I think
Biden's the nominee.
I think you're mischaracterizing what I'm saying. I'm not saying that he should. No, I'm not saying that he should lay off of Biden and not soften him up for the general. I just don't think that, frankly, I think Joe Biden's soft. And I think there's nothing that Bernie's going to say that Donald Trump is not going to weaponize, that they weren't already going to weaponize. I mean, it's all out there. It's not like some narrative that's going to be developed. And frankly, I don't know that all of the things that Bernie would attack Biden on are. I'm not convinced that it would be effective. I think that the strategy has to be more like count on the actual weakness of Biden to reveal itself. It's like there's a wall there. There is a brick wall there. And I don't think the best thing for Bernie to do is bang his head against it, because I think the problem is that he's going to get a contusion, and it's going to be something that we all
feel for years.
For years.
Yeah.
And
it's like what Republicans did with redistricting. And Democrats are going to do the movement.
And I'm simply saying that I think that you stay in, and if Biden is there's just there's only so much that Bernie can convince people about Biden. And I'm just not convinced in this environment that he's going to be able to do all that work without some help from Biden. And the way you get that help from Biden is you put him on that debate stage, and you make him fail, do unforced errors that make him look.
Draw a clock.
Huh?
Draw a clock. Have him draw a clock.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think there are very I think there are benign, not benign things, but seemingly unchallenging things that Biden can't address, frankly. And,
Sam, I'm sorry that I mischaracterized what you said. I'm sorry. I genuinely misinterpreted it. I do just want to give an amusing anecdote. A few weeks ago, I was getting high with Matt, and he thought he was having a stroke because he always thinks that when he gets high.
Right.
And so he drew a clock, and he drew the worst clock I've ever seen in my life. And I said, buddy, that's a great clock, because I didn't want him to have a panic attack and think he was having a stroke because it was harshing my blood.
Right. Well, that was nice of you.
Are you saying we should do the opposite with Joe Biden, no matter how good a clock he draws?
I mean, it'd be nice to him. I mean, he's been on the wrong side of pretty much every major issue for his entire political career, but he seems like a nice guy. I don't know how you beat that.
He's such an asshole.
Look, I think I laid out. I want to close on this. I think I laid out the case pretty fairly about why this is still a race and why Sanders is still in this, and about what I believe that his strategic priorities should be. I do want to leave you with this one message. Something Amber said to me. I think she said it on our show or one of our streams a couple weeks ago. My colleague Amber Frost, that has stuck with me for a bit, which is, even if you lose, you wake up and you continue doing what you were doing because it's all you know how to do. You continue fighting. And this week, we went and we made calls and we sent texts for Bernie Sanders. I know people who booked plane tickets to Michigan. I know people who went. I know people who put out a call for Farsi and Arabic speakers to go to Dearborn, that area, and canvas people. And of course, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans are huge supporters of Bernie Sanders, and they did it, and they did their jobs. Being a socialist, which I am, and which Bernie Sanders is, often means being a loser. Occasionally it means getting hanged or put before a firing squad. Right now it's a little easier, but nevertheless, losing is never very easy. I think that tomorrow we're all going to wake up and we're going to do our jobs. We're going to go back to work. It's not because it's out of irrational hope, not because we just want to prove a point, but because that is the course we decided on, and that is where the opportunity currently lies for the socialist movement in this country.
Yeah,
and
we have
I
to.
know that, and I hope that there are a lot of people who are not necessarily socialists, but they are progressives, and they feel the same way. On the notion that, I'm sure that we will hear messages tomorrow
in between, round the clock COVID-19 coverage, that Bernie should just bow out of the race and we should just focus on Donald Trump right now because everyone's voted and decided. But the people of Wisconsin, Ohio, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Kentucky, they have not decided. Georgia's not decided. Louisiana's not decided. Kansas hasn't decided. Oregon hasn't decided. The entire country is going to have their say. I have nothing but confidence that the Bernie Sanders campaign will continue. They will adjust. They will have the resources to fight because that is the only campaign. Well, there's two campaigns, but one of them happens to have a 1.5 million plus base of donors. The other campaign continues to have fundraisers with millionaires and billionaires. And everyone, and especially in a time of crisis right now, in this pandemic, yes, it is an actual crisis. It is a pretty damn good example of how a capitalist system makes it impossible to handle a crisis, treat a crisis for the common good. As we've seen that the response from Washington is to figure out how very wealthy people can profit off this crisis.
I think Redfield, the head of the CDC today, had a quote to the effect of I really thought private industry would step up. I'm not being facetious. That was literally a quote.
Yeah, and
yes, and of course the quote from the Surgeon General, begging. I think it was a Surgeon General, or it was either Surgeon General Alex Azar saying, "Hey, if you're a private employer, please give your employees paid sick leave."
Right.
The majority of people in this country intuit these things. Majority of people understand it. I don't know. I mean, I'm obviously doing well for myself now, but I spent much of my 20s without health insurance, and I know what that's like, or having health insurance and not being able to pay for a fucking deductible. And of course, the majority of Democratic primary voters, a vast majority, a super majority, say they want single-payer health care, something that Joe Biden went on television and said he wants to be.
I think this is, and I think, listen, I think the question is can you continue to point these things out to the American public and simultaneously, look, the reality is I don't know that Bernie Sanders, there's two questions. Can talking about these things change the dynamic of the primary? And I would suggest that based upon the fact that 60 or 70% of the people going into that booth and not voting, specifically admitting that they're not voting for someone who they agree with on issues is problematic in that way. But the question is how do you continue to build the strength behind the desire for those policies you're talking about, and the idea that it is something that is not only not hard to imagine, but something that's almost hard to imagine that we haven't done that, and not damage that agenda, and to build on that agenda going forward. That's the balance that I'm talking about.
I think, again, it's not a policy proposition; it's a moral proposition. And we over the course of this conversation, we've talked about a couple things. I've described what I believe is a proper strategic orientation for the Bernie Sanders campaign, because they have to dislodge that idea in people's minds that Joe Biden will beat Trump and that Joe Biden is the best nominee against Trump, that Joe Biden is a strong leader. I've not seen very much leadership from Joe Biden in the past few weeks, but I have seen leadership from Bernie Sanders in terms of this pandemic, because he speaks to what the root cause of the pandemic, and not the pandemic, but our inability to deal with the pandemic is. But once again, Sam, and I do have to go. I just want to leave you with this. We will continue to do our jobs because that's what we know how to do. Thank you so much.
All right, Virgil.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And one plug, could I?
Yes, Chapo Trap House.
Okay. Yeah, Chapo Trap House. Check it out. I will be going on shortly at twitch.tv/Chapo Trap House for the Team FYM stream.
Also, I think I'm going to be on Hassan Piker's stream. Haven't really worked it out yet. I've been on the phone with you guys for an hour.
All right. Well, terrific. We'll be off the air in about 15 minutes anyway, so that's perfect.
Okay. Well, if you're watching this, continue to watch Sam Cedar for the next 15 minutes. And after that, migrate to twitch.tv/Chapo Trap House. Or if you happen to own 2 streaming devices, put them on at the same time. They actually sync up together. It's kind of like Dark Side of the Moon and Wizard of Oz.
Virgil, thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a good night. Bye.
Folks, I'm sorry if you've been holding for a long time. Folks have been holding for a long time. It's not going to happen tonight, but tomorrow I think probably what we'll do is just take calls from the beginning. I know I say this all the time, but we will.
I like Virgil's message of waking up in the next day and actually going back to work. Because, I mean, I think back
without
to,
a doubt,
right after 2016 when Trump won and I started reading about like World War II and especially like just the roll into France. It's like, it can be worse, folks.
Well, it is kind of terrifying, though, just how little time we have left. And climate change is putting a time limit on things that we have never seen before in history, although we've seen all sorts of other bad shit. I worry that crises are accelerating faster than we think they're going to. If you talk to a lot of Marxist economists or even just regular economists, they'll tell you there's a crisis coming. Neoliberalism has had a good few decades of it, but a lot of people are acknowledging that, well, no, not a good few decades.
I was like,
it's had
control.
bad for us, good for it.
Yeah.
But it is showing signs of coming to an end and needing to restructure the global capitalist economy in some way. And my fear is that if that restructuring happens soon, if it happened tomorrow, it would be in the direction of some form of authoritarian state capitalism like they have in China. And like thinking about all that,
particularly after, frankly, the crap show that our response to the coronavirus has been, or will be, I think, potentially could be seen as, whereas, China now is seeing less infections relative to the extent that we can believe their numbers. I mean, but that the rate of infection is, they're moving in the right direction. The curve is flattened, as it were. And but part of that is because they had the ability to say, like, okay, 40 million of you people, you don't have mobility.
Yeah, and thinking about that really freaks me out. Like, it really is socialism or barbarism. Like, some people think that socialism or barbarism happened in the 1970s, and instead of overthrowing capitalism, we got barbarism, aka neoliberalism. But it could always get more barbaric, and I'm worried that it will.
I mean, I'm heartened by the message as well. It's always, and people come to me a lot, and they're like, oh my God, things are, especially a few weeks ago when it looked like Trump might actually, was really looking pretty strong for re-election. Like, what the hell do I do? And I'm like, just focus on what you can do. I mean, we are entering, like Jamie said, this really kind of terrifying period where we have climate change is threatening so much about our daily lives. And I am one person. I just know what I can do. I know that I can try to help improve people's lives by, again, it's like basic things like clean water. It's basic things like, rural broadband. If you could help make people's lives better, I don't know. It's, and there are bigger movements that are addressing things like climate change and decarbonization. But even if that's like too overwhelming for you, just focus on what you can do.
Yeah, and we really don't have a choice in the matter. Like, maybe we're going to fail. Great. But at least we can say that we tried when the shit hits the fan.
But I will say, with that, I'm an optimist, believe it or not, after tonight. We have to learn from our mistakes. And I mean this, and it's a hard moment. And like I got slaughtered in an election a year ago, and I had to sit back and say, what did we do wrong? What did we do right? And some of it had to do with coalitions, and some of it had to do with, not being able to see the strategy through the noise. And second elections for presidential campaigns often have a lot of these kinds of scenarios where they overcorrect.
Right.
And
people are always fighting the last battle.
Exactly. We saw it with Hillary Clinton. We saw it with Jesse Jackson. We even saw it with Obama, but he was just going to win that election. I mean, there was a huge overcorrection there too. He lost a lot of the movement in 2012.
Well, they jettisoned a lot.
They jettisoned, I should say that.
I mean, that's another story. But
that's right.
Good.
And I think that even happened with this race. And so I'm not saying a full obviously there should be an autopsy of this race if it doesn't go well. But I think the movement needs to learn from understanding these numbers, understanding what it means to expand the electorate, but then like not focus on the electorate that got you there. What it means what is the message for the next couple of cycles by looking at the generations moving forward. This is in 2012. We don't have the same message as 2012. And in 4 years, we're going to have a different message. So we need to understand tactically what leverage we have as a couple of generations that are extremely progressive.
I mean, just look at this in Michigan.
That's right. That's
exactly.
Stunning.
On cue.
It's stunning.
Stark.
I mean, that's just nuts.
Yeah, and again, it's.
Oh my
God. Yeah, I know. And here's the thing: it's like you can't see elections as the end; they're the beginning. And the fight starts once the new people are inaugurated. And I think in 2008, in particular. There's a lot of kind of like, and you even saw this in like the culture around the time, like Obama's kind of like almost the Superman, and like that's when all the superhero movies took off, and you thought that he could just fix everything. Well, he couldn't, and just he just totally lost OFA. He decided to play.
Well, he jettisoned it, and I think the part of the opportunity cost that I'm talking about is like, how do you maintain the future here? Like, how do you keep these people engaged? How do you make them believe that there is, there is some hope? The way that Bernie deals with the campaign going forward, and I think this is really, frankly, more of a tactical thing, and sort of like, we have a limited amount of resource. Everything to me is sort of like very old school, Super Zaxxon video games. I have an X number of these weapons and these assets, and what's going to take me farther. And so I think one of the opportunity costs is this level of enthusiasm in terms of the future, right? I mean, it's staggering. Like, it is quite clear that there is a incredible generational divide here that is, I'd be curious to go back to the 60s and see it, because I have a feeling this is more dramatic.
Actually,
yeah, it is.
No, boomers are less liberal than their parents.
Yeah.
The boomers supported Vietnam.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Economically
as
liberal.
teenagers.
They were against labor. I mean, don't forget, we love to praise Jimmy. Who's our president?
Carter.
Jimmy Carter. Thank you. Oh my God.
I don't want to praise
Jimmy Carter.
No, but I think a lot of people look at him. Okay, you guys are wonks, but
he's been good after the fact. But
after the fact,
not so good.
but that's exactly the point. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say, is that there is this reputation of him. Okay, he's going to vote for Bernie, whatever. He took on labor, and that generation was the beginning of the generation.
Well, McGovern had a big falling out with labor
exactly.
too. But in part,
but you understand,
it's a very complicated dynamic, because in part it was because he wanted to make have primaries.
Primaries, exactly.
Like, have it be Democratic.
But you understand what I'm trying to say
labor
here.
Was much more conservative than largely the rank and file of organized labor is now. Like, it was a huge failure.
Socially conservative.
And this goes back to intersectionality and why I think it's important. Or maybe I should use a less loaded term that's been less ruined by neoliberals. I don't know, coalition building, what have you, not throwing oppressed groups of people under the bus. But part of why labor lost was because they were not intersectional enough. And we've seen it throughout history. The reason why we need to be fighting racism and white supremacy as workers is not just to be nice to people who are less privileged than us. Like, it's bad for all workers when you have white workers looking down on their black brothers and sisters.
Totally.
And siding with the bosses. This is a line of thought that goes back to Du Bois, Wages of Whiteness. And that's been used to keep people down. And it was very much a part of the fall of organized labor in the 1970s. So I think if we can keep that in mind, that kind of intersectionality and that kind of coalition building is good, because the working class as it exists now is fragmented along lines of identity.
That goes back to my point. So we don't disagree on these things. It's just that the language was not framed from that perspective. And I think moving forward as movements, as organizers, as campaigns, as activists, I mean, one thing we'll say that Bernie Sanders in 2016 stepped up and said, every single one of you who are frustrated, you should be running for office at the local level. And look how many people did.
Right.
Now, granted, the infrastructure still needs to grow to support those candidates. And I say that, like, go out there and learn how to be a campaign manager, go out there and learn how to be a field director, how to do call time, because those campaigns need that support. They don't have it.
One factor, and obviously, we got to wrap up in about 5 minutes anyways, but in Michigan, I think this is probably of the exit polls, women went to Biden 57% to 39% for Sanders. And it's just like, I don't know if that's a failure of setting the premise of of Joe Biden's history with women. Al Franken got kicked out of the Senate for nothing too dissimilar to what Joe Biden's been doing over the years. The story of Anita Hill, and I mean, just even as one of the overlooked things in that video of where he was going at it with the union guy about guns was his hush hush that he gave to his, a woman working on his campaign,
Simone.
presumably. Was it Simone? I couldn't see.
Simone, right?
Oh, I think she was off
The
camera.
different
But the
video,
idea of
yeah.
like the hush hush, part of that probably is a function. Like, I don't know that he wouldn't have done that to a man, but nevertheless, I think like there are forces here at play that I don't know that Bernie Sanders can overcome. That on some level, I think it's, from my perspective, like the most effective thing is to let Joe Biden make a huge unforced error in the context of a debate. Whether that happens or not, I don't know, but it is.
Faz sent an email out that didn't make it sound like
That what?
I mean, I'm sorry, I just lost the email.
Well, I think whatever Bernie does from now on, he's got to do something. He's got to run whatever the remainder of the race looks like. He's got to run a remainder of the race that he's proud of. I mean, if you think, like Bernie, I'm Jewish. I went to Hebrew school, and I think 40 years ago was the start of Reaganism, when this country really started coming apart, and that was when Bernie Sanders was early in his career. And so, I think for a lot of liberals and leftists, maybe he is kind of that Moses figure, taking us through the desert, but can't see the promised land.
Very possibly. Very possibly. We will talk more about this on the show tomorrow. We will be here at noon. Folks, keep your heads up. There were some numbers tonight that were incredibly encouraging in terms of like the issues at the end of the day that Bernie represents. I think Bernie would probably be the first person to tell you that the race is not, that his whole campaign, that what he's been doing for the past 5 years has not been about him attaining some position, but rather the issues that he's been fighting for his whole life.
The one that matters is me.
Becoming realized. And the idea that you have 60% of the Democratic Party being asked explicitly, do you support getting rid of your private insurance for government insurance? And they say yes. I think that's pretty huge. And if those numbers were like 50% of people said that they're voting just on electability, this would be a very, very different situation. I don't know how you change that or how you convince them that Biden is not electable when so many people have told them that he is. And there's one thing that I think that people really like to do is outsource these type of decisions that are in some ways overwhelming. And when you have so many people in the context of the media, but also I think more importantly, Democratic leaders stepping in and saying like, yeah, he's the guy. I think that's very, very difficult to fight. Because you're not just arguing facts. You're just saying that, like, did you support Booker? He's not credible. Did you support Harris? She's not credible. Did you support Buttigieg? He's not credible. Did you support Klobuchar? He's not credible. And if you supported Warren, she's not saying that I can win. Like, that's the argument you're having with people in their heads. And because they've already said, we can't decide. We've seen Joe stumble and bumble. We've seen him do all these things, and we can't decide. And so we just outsourced it to these people. That's why he did not take off until you had Clyburn and all these other people. And, you know, Obama in the background going like, I call Buttigieg and I just said hinty, hinty. And so all of this is there. And to argue against all of that, like, I don't know who could make that argument. You know, I feel like if you gave me an hour with each one of those voters, maybe I could make that argument. But he's not going to have that.
Barack Obama, come and save us.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't
know about that. I think it's the opposite.
All right. But with all that said, keep your heads up. You know, Washington State is still out there. I think, you know, I'm hoping that they stay in for the debate because I think that's at least one more shot in which could change the tenor of the way that people perceive Biden in this race where they're making that determination. But it's also, you know, we're also at the point where it's been just an amazing accomplishment that there is a huge opportunity to build on. And I can tell you that, like, the idea that we are here today versus where we were 15 years ago is, I think a lot of people who are supportive of Bernie Sanders, you know, and looking at these polls, it's hard to sort of, for them to wrap their heads around because they just, you know.
Can I say one thing? It's not just that he transformed the way that campaigns work, meaning small dollar donations can now fund congressional campaigns and local elections, which didn't exist before. The media. Because of that infrastructure, we have an alternative media. Because he was willing to challenge the media and say, you know, there's another message. You know, your media that you've been working on for the last, how many years? 15 years? 20 years, no, 20? 15, what's the, I don't know. I don't even know.
Oh, wow.
Long time. 10 years here, but prior to that too. And other independent media has grown because the message has been needed and there's now the infrastructure for small dollar donations to come in and fund these places. And I think this is something that they haven't been able to combat, and they're, you know, they're clinging to an older generation, and we're just going to grow as a result. So he might be in his 70s, but I have no doubt that there's this swath of folks who are going to rise up. I mean, AOC was knocking on doors 4 years ago, and she's now in Congress. So.
All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Check out the Nomiki show. You can find it on patreon.com. The Antifada, you can find that on patreon.com.
Extra electoral options at the Antifada.
And Literary Hangover. If you are not a subscriber to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button wherever that is on your page or whatever, like bells or whatever, whistles, all that stuff. Do all that. And if you're watching us on Twitch, watch us. You know, we go live every day at noon. So, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow.
Also, Aaron Kleinman, I don't know, you were sitting there.
FutureNow.org.
In case you missed it.
Check out Future Now. You need to have a podcast, man, because otherwise there's nothing to plug. FutureNow.org.
Matriarch.
Follow him on Twitter at Bobby Big Wheel. And now, see you tomorrow. Aaron,
all right, thanks, Sam.
That was awesome.
To get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.